An active-duty C-130 pilot allegedly executed the recovery of a massive, deceased humanoid creature from Bram Airfield. As he approached the surreal cargo, the initial disbelief gave way to a chilling realization. This wasn't some strange cryptid. It was a person, albeit one of gargantuan proportions. The body reportedly clocked in at an astonishing 1,100 pounds. This narrative feeds directly into the larger, deeply unsettling discussion that the abduction phenomenon is not merely psychological or metaphorical. It is profoundly, brutally physical. The infamous Greys arrive, seize individuals, transport them onto their crafts, and the victims are literally gone, physically vanished from our reality. They are then involuntarily incorporated into a horrific, invasive, extraterrestrial breeding program. Breeding program. This explains the harrowing missing fetus syndrome. Those of us who have thoroughly studied alien abduction cases understand clearly. It's not simply missing. It has been deliberately taken. I've spent considerable time engaging with high-level government and military contacts, consistently probing them on topics like UFOs, crash retrievals, and extraterrestrial bodies. Often, these individuals are surprisingly forthcoming and candid. However, there is a clear, immediate line they will not cross. The moment you introduce the name Kandahar giant, or venture onto the general topic of giants, these hardened professionals visibly freeze. Their demeanor shifts entirely. The obvious question is, why does this specific subject strike such paralyzing fear? Because it directly implicates the occult, revealing layers of history humanity is not meant to see. These are not merely big men. They are, according to ancient texts and esoteric research, the terrifying, hybrid offspring of the Canaanite Nephilim. This chilling connection is supported by historical anomalies, such as security camera footage recovered from the History Museum in Baghdad. That footage reportedly showed U.S. military personnel systematically entering the facility and meticulously removing colossal sarcophagi, literal containers for the bodies of dead giants. This is why the standard expectation of the Bible must be challenged. The Bible provides the core truth we need, yet it tells us about everything wrong, or rather, it chooses only to illuminate select critical things. Jesus of Nazareth, the very maker of the universe, came to earth. He could have easily divulged complex scientific secrets, saying, "Let me tell you something about this phenomenon called electricity, or quantum mechanics." Instead, he spoke to us with profound simplicity, treating us like spiritual toddlers, solely focused on conveying the essential truth about the kingdom and the nature of his Father. If that was the primary mission of the Son of God, clothed in flesh, why should we harbor the expectation that the Bible would meticulously detail interdimensional beings, crash retrievals, and secret histories? Hey, before you hit that pause button, we are thrilled to welcome back Timothy Alberino, one of our absolute favorite, most insightful guests. Just a serious word of caution. Be careful with this episode. We are intentionally pushing the boundaries far past what we've previously explored here. Our discussion will cover the complexities of interdimensionality, elements of alien lore, the philosophical underpinnings of presuppositionalism, and a strong, rigorous streak of theology is expertly routed right through the middle of it all. Keep in mind that Timothy is not just a casual commentator. He is a dedicated researcher and arguably one of the most experienced guests we've ever hosted regarding global realities that are frequently and systematically covered up, areas that desperately lack proper public discourse and accountability. We're about to dive into a genuinely fascinating conversation that ties all these threads together by the very end. However, I would strongly counsel awareness. There are deeply sensitive topics that we will discuss, especially when we venture into the specifics of alien abductions and related phenomena. So please exercise caution with this one, especially if you are watching with children or others. You can utilize the table of contents provided below, but please stick with us. This is a conversation with one of my truly favorite guests we've ever had. We also circle back to the profound work of C. South Lewis at the close, so if you're interested in linking the Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien, and Lord of the Rings to deep theological truths, this is going to be right up your alley. We love you guys. Enjoy the show. Everyone naturally aspires to reach the high places, the pinnacle of knowledge or spiritual insight. But if you genuinely want to ascend that high, you must first commit to going incredibly deep. What's up? Welcome back to Deep Ends. How are you holding up? Great, man. The first episode of 2026, right? We're setting the pace early this year. Yeah. Yeah, it is the actual first episode. The first real broadcast-ready episode, I think. Yeah, exactly. It's not like we sometimes dedicate 9 grueling hours to filming a spectacular episode only to determine afterward that it simply cannot be released to the public. That's always fun, isn't it? People genuinely have no idea about the increasing standards, how this production bar has continuously gone up and up and up. Thank you so much for carving out the time to be here with us. Tim Alberino. Happy to be back with you guys. It's always an adventure. You are definitively the man. I'm a man. You, sir, are a man. Before we jump into the deep end, let me properly introduce you to the audience for a second. I've actually got a vital question for you that ties into your branding. Timothy is famously known as the modern-day Indiana Jones. Not a Crocodile Dundee. You want to switch the branding? Yeah, all right, let's update this. That's far more evocative. The modern-day Crocodile Dundee. Much more appropriate for the subject matter, actually. His incredibly inquisitive mind and an insatiable, almost restless appetite for global adventure have propelled him across the entire planet, leading expeditions in search of lost cities submerged by history, vanished civilizations, hidden treasures, and legendary creatures often relegated to myth. You are also recognized as an avid, meticulous researcher and a published author whose scholarly pursuits are far-ranging and demanding, having taken you on extensive expeditions across every corner of the world. After years of relentless, rigorous study, you've garnered an expansive, synthesized knowledge base that has uniquely enabled you to dissertate with unchallenged authority on a dizzying variety of esoteric and often forbidden topics. These include complex theories on alternative history, foundational ancient mythologies, the construction of megalithic architectures, the truth behind giants, elusive cryptids like Bigfoot and others, the full spectrum of UFOs and alien abductions, the looming threat of transhumanism and emerging technologies, the deeper implications of occult conspiracy, and its ultimate tie to Christian eschatology. There's truly a massive, often contradictory blend of different topics you've managed to interweave together. It's certainly an incredibly eclectic, interwoven academic pursuit. Yeah, it takes you all over the academic pursuit. Absolutely. And you currently reside in what is probably the most breathtakingly beautiful city I've personally experienced recently. Bozeman, Montana. We were fortunate enough to come out there and hang with you for a few days. That was a lot of fun. Being able to step outside your door and just gaze upon God's creation was overwhelming. I remember thinking, man, we need a farm out here, and we need it quickly. And you can fly direct from Montana straight to Nashville, which is surely God's greatest gift to mankind. Well, I've never personally been able to avail myself of that gift yet. But, seriously, my husband and I were the only ones who seemed to be availing themselves of the direct flight so far. Yeah. I've still never been able to take the direct flight. Not a single time. Yeah. It has genuinely never worked out with my schedule. How is this even possible? As everyone knows, I absolutely love airports and airplanes. So, I make sure to take full advantage of staying in an airport as long as humanly possible. Yeah. Allegiant. Of course, I'm kidding entirely. Allegiant has a convenient direct flight to Nashville and back. Not when I'm flying, apparently. I see. So, you have 5 incredible kids. How long have you and your wife been married? 20 years. 20 years. Congrats, that's massive. 5 boys. Yep. Wow. That is a significant amount of testosterone swirling around that house. Yeah. Very nice. A lot of testosterone, yes. My wife is vastly outnumbered, big time. Yeah. That's okay. And now I even have a male dog. So the odds are stacked against her. Making it work constantly. Here's my core question, and we'll start with this, then transition into what I think are some truly fascinating topics because I want to hear everything you're currently studying. But structurally, how exactly does a kid navigate childhood and then evolve into Crocodile Dundee? Where was that crucial, life-altering decision made? Bro? Well, I grew up in what was, to me, a very, very boring part of America. I grew up in Brook Park, Ohio, which is a fairly unremarkable suburb of Cleveland. I was fortunate to have a very good, solid upbringing, though, by two incredible parents. Both of my parents have now passed away. My mom died when I was 14, and my dad passed away in 2020. But they were phenomenal, supportive parents. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, MHM. So, I had a very good, fundamentally solid upbringing, but unfortunately for my disposition, growing up, I was just chronically bored. And I wanted true adventure really badly. So, I would ride my bike incessantly all over the place, venturing deep into the woods to make forts and hideouts, and I would dream. When I was very young, I desperately wanted to go to Africa. And that was my huge, burning desire, to go to Africa and explore. Then, as I got older and more aware of history, it pivoted specifically to Ireland and Scotland, Ireland primarily because of the influential movie Braveheart and also because of, does anyone else remember the movie Rob Roy? I don't know if I was even born then. That was such a profoundly good movie. Rob Roy. No, seriously. Rob Roy was a phenomenal movie. It was, with Liam Neeson, I think it's Rob Roy. Yes, Rob Roy. I watched Rob Roy intensely growing up as a teenager, and I have some Irish heritage, though I'm mostly Italian, like Italian, Scottish, Irish, and so that film just powerfully resonated with me. I'm going somewhere with this story. So, when I was growing up, I would listen exclusively to Celtic music. That was my defining thing. That was my sound. I've since migrated to the more intense Viking music. Celtic women. Celtic women. No, not so much Celtic women, but acoustic Celtic music, like the mournful bagpipes and the traditional Celtic violin. And you start wearing the little, what do they call it? The little thing this little skirt for men. The skirt for men. Yes, the kilt. Kilt. And so when I was in my late teens, my singular, overwhelming desire was to go to Scotland and Ireland. And I was stuck in high school, which, I always say that there is no word in the English language adequate to express the depth of my dislike for school, especially high school. I am serious about that. There's not I can say I hated it. I can say I loathed it, but none of those words really truly capture the profound distaste I abhorred the institution of high school. And it genuinely felt like prison. I know it sounds dramatic, but I honestly would have rather been incarcerated. So I just hated it for a multiplicity of deeply rooted reasons. So when I was in my senior year, so here I am, intensely bored out of my brains, living in Brook Park. I was attending high school in Mid-Park High, and that entire building has since been leveled and is completely gone now. But, so I really wanted to go to Ireland, Scotland, and Ireland, and I really, really hated high school. And yet, I wasn't a bad student. I wasn't let me reframe that. I wasn't a disruptive student. Okay. So I basically just did my own internal thing. I essentially just sat there and read the Bible and the Lord of the Rings constantly. And I had a self-imposed, ironclad no homework policy. This definitely did not go over well with my father, understandably. But I had a strict no homework policy. So the teachers would dutifully pass out the homework assignments, but I hated the environment of school so much that I steadfastly refused to take any of it home with me. I was like, nope, I am mandated to spend 7 hours of my day here. When I go home, I am not taking any of this academic baggage with me. When I go home, that's my personal time. I'm done with this. How did you manage to pass it all? Well, I'll get to that crucial detail in a minute. So, they would hand out the homework, and I would literally just write my name on the top corner and immediately pass it back in. And I distinctly remember my English teacher calling me up one time. She said, "Timothy, are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I am quite sure." I made the calculation. I'm going to pass by the absolute skin of my teeth just so I don't receive a beating from my father. Oh my God. But that was my limit. I was like, I'm done. And, but I wasn't disruptive, generally speaking. Maybe I was disruptive in Spanish class, but outside of that, I really wasn't disruptive. I eventually got kicked out of Spanish class, actually. But, that's a slightly funny story. I guess I should tell that one quickly. So, I signed up for a conversational Italian class in high school. I don't remember which grade I was in. And I was genuinely interested in learning Italian because I'm Italian. I'm Italian American. And, you had to take a foreign language requirement. And so I started off the year, I think it was my sophomore year or something. And it turns out that not enough students signed up for the Italian class. So they automatically slotted all the people who were intending to learn Italian into Spanish. And I had absolutely zero desire to learn Spanish. I had negative desire to learn Spanish. And I got involuntarily put into the Spanish class. Wonderful teacher. In fact, one of the best teachers I've ever had was my Spanish teacher in high school. Her name was, she's one of the only teachers whose name I remember clearly. Her name was Mrs. Santa Maria, and she was just a truly wonderful, patient teacher, but I was not a wonderful Spanish student. And everyone had to choose these. This is actually very, very ironic. Everybody chose names. Everyone had to take a Spanish name, and so you had the standard names like Eduardo and an Alberto and whatever. Juan. I chose Don Quixote. Oh my gosh. Now, do you know the story of Don Quixote? Yes, dude, of course. Don Quixote. The entire story of Don Quixote is that he was, constantly looking for giants, chasing windmills, thinking they were massive giants, right? Oh my word. So anyway, I chose Don Quixote just because it was a humorous, relevant name. And eventually, I just didn't like Spanish. I couldn't connect with it. I didn't want to learn it. And that was the one class where perhaps I was mildly disruptive. I was just having fun because I liked the teacher a lot. She was a lot of fun. But she came up to me at the end of class one day, looking puzzled, and she goes, "How come you don't put any genuine effort into this? Like, you have the capacity to learn Spanish, which I think you could do really well. You just don't take it seriously. You don't put any effort into it." I said, "Mrs. Santa Maria, no offense intended, but I am never going to use this stupid language in my entire life. I'm never going to use Spanish. Now you do. So here I am, self-proclaimed Don Quixote, declaring I'm never going to use Spanish, right?" And she said, "Well, I think it might be better then that we find a different class placement for you." So I got, kicked out. That's far too aggressive of a term. You got transferred. I got gently transferred out of Spanish and into study hall, which I was incredibly good at, because all I did was sit there and read the books that I wanted to read. Read Lord of the Rings. So I thought I was never going to use Spanish. Boy, was I profoundly wrong. So I ended up learning Spanish eventually, obviously, but I learned it in Peru. So how did I get to Peru? During my senior year of high school. I'll give you one final illustration of how I wasn't technically disruptive, but I was absolutely doing my own unique thing. So we would have half an hour, I think, allocated for lunch. That was simply not enough time. Especially if you had to get... my dad didn't make a lot of money, so I utilized the school lunch program. And I had to stand in line with my tray, waiting patiently to get my food. And by the time you actually got your food, navigated through the line, and finally sat down at the table, you had maybe 10 minutes left to eat. And a lot of times the bell would ring and I wasn't done eating. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to take 40 minutes for lunch. I would just sit there. Oh my gosh. And calmly eat lunch, and I'd be the only guy still sitting there in the empty cafeteria. And the principal would inevitably walk by. He was an Italian guy, too, Italian-American, Mr. Rogero. And he'd look over at me, clearly confused, and be like, "Mr. Alberino, what precisely are you doing?" And I would look up at him calmly, and I would say, "Oh, I'm finishing my lunch, sir." And he would pause, go, "Okay," and walk away. So then I would walk into my next class, which was science class, and I would just stroll in the back. The teacher would already be talking. He'd be deep into his teaching, and he'd look up at me. He'd kind of give me a puzzled look on his face, and he'd be like, "Oh, whatever," and he'd keep teaching, and I'd sit down. And so I passed because I did just good enough to pass, because I had my dad would constantly threaten me with summer school, and that's the only motivation I needed. I was like, I am absolutely not doing school during the summer. Yeah. So I barely passed, and kids, don't be like Timothy Alberino. It's really not a good idea to do what I did, clearly. But, it's just illustrating the profound degree to which I just fundamentally did not like school. primarily because it wasn't teaching me anything I was actually interested in. Yeah. You were just completely bored. I'm autodidactic. If you give me something that I'm genuinely interested in, I will devour it whole. MHM. And I wasn't interested in any of this material. You know what I mean? There were a couple of subjects, but for the most part, I wasn't interested in any of that. And so, ultimately, in my senior year, in the first couple of weeks of my senior year, they massively screwed my schedule up. I had two English classes, the exact same class, scheduled back to back, and nobody was fixing it. Like, I'm literally in the same class twice, back to back. And so they sent me to the school counselor to try and work out the schedule anomaly. But the counselor wasn't nearly as interested in working out the schedule as she was in arguing with me about my religious faith. Yeah. It was completely bizarre. So, she would actually get into these loud, yelling arguments with me about various foundational aspects of Christianity and whatever doctrine. It was just utterly bizarre. Were you bringing it up? Or was she just... No, she would bring it up, and I think it's because I would read my Bible openly in class a lot of times. And that consistently triggered her, and it was the strangest thing, sitting there having your school counselor completely losing it, yelling at you because she's, atheistic or aggressively agnostic or whatever. And I was just utterly fed up with the entire situation. So I told my dad, this lady is just constantly yelling at me, trying to get into arguments with me about theology and in Christianity. I said, this whole thing is a total joke. I don't want to go anymore. I'm done with this. I don't want to go. And my dad would never have considered letting me drop out to homeschool if it weren't for my stepmom and Anne and my stepsisters who genuinely convinced my dad. They said, no, you should. This academic situation isn't good for him. You should just let him cut him loose and let him go do his own thing. He'll finish school and get his diploma eventually, but let him pursue his own interests. And it truly was a miracle, but they convinced my dad. It was a really miraculous shift. And so my dad pulled me out, and I should mention that I always say I dropped out / got kicked out of high school because my counselor told me one of the first things this lady told me was that she didn't like me. Like, immediately there was intense confrontation between us, and I'm generally not a confrontational person. I was very respectful. I was raised very well. I was very respectful to adults, to my elders, but she actively wanted to be combative with me. And where was I going with this? You're very respectful. Your dad pulled you out. I totally lost the thread there. Counselor didn't like you. She was competitive. And she told me, one of the first brutal things she told me was, nobody likes you. Can you even imagine this pronouncement coming from a professional counselor? Counselor, mind you. Nobody likes you. Like what? Your teachers don't like you. My teachers don't like me? Yeah, they don't like you. Why don't my teachers like me? Apart from the simple fact that I just turned my homework back in blank. I get that, but I'm not a disruptive student. And she just said flatly, they don't like you. And they don't want you in their class. And it really, I realized, was just her. She personally didn't like me at all. Yeah. And so she was aggressively trying to diminish me and publicly embarrass me. And again, this is a trained counselor. And she was saying, they don't want you. They don't want you in their class. And so, we're going to have to figure something else out for you. I was effectively being forced out of the institution. But looking back, I realized this was entirely providential. I was being edged toward the door, and ultimately, the administrator left me with absolutely no viable alternative. When my dad met her, he immediately grasped the situation. That remaining wasn't an option for me. So, recognizing the inevitable, he took the proactive step of officially withdrawing me, sealing my exit from that stifling environment. And, well, suddenly I was liberated, set free from that scholastic Hades, and I felt this surge of optimism, thinking, perfect, this is it. Now the true adventure begins. Just for context, my father enrolled me in a high school correspondence program, and I must confess I genuinely did one single sheet of notes for my entire senior year. I hesitate to even share this, feeling like I'm setting a terrible example for any students listening. But yes, one piece of paper, and that was the extent of my academic output. And yet, they mailed me a full diploma. I hadn't even expected one. I thought, Surely I won't qualify. But there it was. Then it must have been the most profound sheet of notes ever composed. Exactly. It had to be. Honestly, I don't even know if I remembered to mail it back. I can't recall the logistics, but the fact remains, one sheet of notes. After that, I dedicated every waking hour to working double shifts, accumulating money for my actual, intended purpose, funding my grand excursion to Scotland and Ireland. You were acquiring real, practical life skills, though. Absolutely. I was focused entirely on earning and hoarding every spare dollar necessary to finally get the heck out of Brook Park. So now that I was officially a free agent, my best friend Carlos, who was a bit older and my partner in these schemes, and I finalized our plans. I had scrimped and saved, and we had meticulously mapped out this absolutely epic, 3-month journey across Scotland and Ireland. Since we couldn't afford a direct flight to Inverness, we opted for the cheaper route, flying into Gatwick, England. This felt like the pinnacle, the absolute fulfillment of everything I dreamed of. There were several significant events that propelled me to this moment, preparatory steps I won't burden you with now, but suffice it to say, this journey felt fated. Our 3-month itinerary was hardcore. We planned to start by hiking the newly established Inverness Trail, connecting from Inverness down to the Highland Way, hike the entirety of the Highland Way, then cross the Channel and finally meet and stay with a friend we had in Ireland. It sounds utterly ambitious, bordering on insane, but this was our normal. We were used to extreme physical challenges. Exactly. We would frequently camp out in the dead of winter, like pitching a tent in the woods on Christmas night when the temperature was plummeting far below zero. We embraced that level of ruggedness constantly. Though, speaking of ruggedness, there's a highly disputed event. Allegedly, we burned down 30 acres of state forest during one of those excursions. I maintain my disbelief, but the fact that a forest ranger actually drove all the way from New York State to my house to question me tells you it was serious. That's a saga for another time. Not disruptive in the classroom, but certainly disruptive elsewhere. Allegedly, we scorched 30 acres of state park forestry. It was a genuinely weird situation. I still don't believe we were responsible. But that incident was bizarre enough that they threatened me with jail time. So, bringing us back, we were accustomed to operating outside the norm, used to pulling off outrageous feats. And we finally land at London Gatwick Airport, utterly buzzing with anticipation. We had our rucksacks loaded with basic camping equipment and a modest amount of cash. We weren't wealthy travelers, but we never needed to be. We knew how to rough it and make resources stretch indefinitely. Unfortunately, we were immediately flagged by immigration officials. They pulled us aside, detained us, and led us into a stark, uncomfortable holding room. It was just Carlos and me, surrounded by a group of individuals primarily from India and Pakistan. We waited there for what felt like endless hours. Finally, they began calling us in one by one for rigorous interviews, or rather, interrogations. The officer was a woman whose name I never learned, but her voice remains etched in my memory, chilling and precise. She called me in after Carlos, seated me, and immediately launched into her cold line of questioning. "What exactly is your purpose in my country?" I explained our carefully constructed plan. "Well, we're going to catch a train north, up through Scotland to Inverness, and then we're going to hike the Inverness Trail to the Highland Way." She cut me off abruptly. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hike? What is hike?" I looked at her, totally thrown, wondering if she was serious. "What do you mean, what's hike? You know what hiking is?" Her expression didn't change. "No, I truly don't know what that is. What is hike? What activities do you engage in when you hike?" I sat there, trying earnestly to explain the simple concept of walking long distances outdoors, knowing full well she was being facetious and deliberately antagonistic. Then she declared flatly, "No, we don't do that here." She pressed on, "Where precisely are you planning to stay when you hike? Where do you intend to sleep?" I answered, "Well, we're going to camp." She cocked her head. "Camp? And what, pray tell, is camp?" And I couldn't help it. I started laughing internally, thinking, seriously? Everyone knows what camping is. She noticed my reaction immediately. She leaned in close and, with that sharp British accent, delivered the warning. "You know, young man, It is generally unwise to laugh at an immigration officer. I quickly corrected her, maintaining my composure. I'm not laughing at you, ma'am. I'm laughing at the idea that you genuinely don't know what camping is. Because I know you do. She shot back, hardening her stare. Perhaps you Yanks engage in such activities where you come from, but we certainly do not do that here. Yanks, I thought. I'd never been called a Yank before. It felt strange, almost like a strange badge of honor I was now required to wear. But in that instant, the light bulb went off. I knew. Oh, she's going to deport me. There was no doubt left. I must emphasize, neither Carlos nor I were being disrespectful or antagonistic. We were polite, well-mannered young men. I had been raised to respect my elders and officials. Yet she seemed determined. She was clearly an authoritative figure, perhaps a staunch feminist, who simply did not want two young, male American Yanks setting foot on British soil. Her pretense was that she didn't believe we had sufficient funds, thinking we intended to illegally seek work, an accusation that made zero sense given our detailed, non-lucrative hiking plans. The next day, she deported us. You have to grasp the magnitude of this. This wasn't just a trip. This was my freedom, my long-awaited dream finally within reach. I was hours away from boarding a train north to Inverness. I even had a side mission planned. I was going to visit the Eagle and Child Pub, the historic meeting spot for C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and the Inklings before heading north. I was there. And yet, now I was confined to the airport, scheduled for a humiliating removal the following day. I genuinely cannot put into words the profound, crushing depression that settled over me. It was absolutely devastating. I remember very little about the return journey. All I recall is sinking into my seat on the flight back home. The psychological weight was so heavy that the rest of the journey is a complete blank. It was an extremely traumatizing experience. But, as I learned later, it was entirely providential. I was shipped back, landing defeated in Brook Park, Ohio. I felt completely trapped, thinking, I escaped high school, but I still can't escape this town. It was a period of intense frustration and difficulty in my young life. However, just when I should have been hiking the Irish coastline, perhaps the very next Sunday, certainly within that initial time frame of my planned trip, a Mexican-American missionary to Peru was scheduled to preach at my dad's church. Wow! His name was Alfonso Felix. My stepmother, who had previously done mission work in Peru and knew Alfonso personally, approached me. Tim, she said, I know your heart was set on Dublin and Ireland, but I sincerely believe you should go to Peru. I can't stress this enough. I had absolutely not a desire to go to Peru. It was not on my radar at all. And here I need to insert a profoundly strange and, perhaps slightly morbid backstory, though it isn't meant to be a sad narrative. My mother died from cancer when I was 14. She was receiving hospice care right there in our living room. I distinctly recall one evening when my twin brother, my older brother, my dad, and I were all crowded into the kitchen. My dad looked at my twin and me and told us we needed to go say goodbye to Mom, explaining that she was on hospice and could pass away at any moment. Say goodbye to my mom? How does a 14-year-old process being told to go articulate a final farewell? I was agonizing, trying desperately to formulate the right words. It felt like the most emotionally difficult task imaginable. I must have been 13, about to turn 14 when she passed. My dad was insistent. You need to do this now. My older brother reinforced it. So I walked into the living room. My mother was sitting on the couch watching television. I sat down beside her, and I swear this is the phrase that left my lips, spontaneously, without any conscious thought. I said, Mom, I'm going to go to Peru. When you were 13. The second the words were out, my brain screamed, what are you saying? I wanted Africa, I wanted Ireland, not Peru. I had zero interest. I had no idea where that declaration came from. Did that memory surface when the missionary from Peru arrived in town? Eventually, yes, and I amplified the statement to her. I'm going to be a missionary to Peru. That was the only way I could frame such a bizarre, unexpected promise. That was your conceptual framework. Precisely. And she simply looked at me and said, "Oh, that's good. Interesting." That was the entire exchange. I stood up, went back into the kitchen, and my dad asked, "Did you say goodbye?" I said, "Yes. I mean, I wasn't going to say, 'Goodbye, Mom.' I couldn't do that. You know what I mean?" Yeah. So, that's what I said. But I was utterly baffled as to why I said it. I had zero interest in Peru. I was genuinely perplexed by where that came from. Now, look at this bizarre sequence of events. I told my Spanish teacher I'd never use the stupid language. I told my dying mother I was going to Peru. Then I got forcibly deported from England en route to Scotland and Ireland. The door to my ultimate dream was violently slammed shut in my face. This, I realized, is precisely how God chooses to operate in my life. I never receive subtle hints or quiet nudges. For me, the divine guidance involves a door being physically and painfully slammed, followed by the blinding realization, okay, that was clearly the wrong direction. So the Europe door was smashed shut, and instantly, this completely unwelcome door, Peru, swung wide open. I met Alfonso Felix. After he preached at my father's church, he told my dad that before he would commit to taking me to Peru, he needed to know who I was. He wanted to take a long walk with me. I remember that walk vividly. We just moved through the neighborhood, and he asked penetrating questions about my life, my aspirations, and my faith. By the time we finished, he told my father, "I will take him to Peru." And just like that, I was on my way to Tarapoto, Peru with him. "That was your first trip there?" "Yes, the very first time. I left with him." "And how old were you?" "I believe I was 17, perhaps 18. "Okay. Around that age. Was this when you moved to the deep Amazon?" "Well, he was residing in Tarapoto, which is considered a jungle city, situated deep in the Amazon basin, specifically the high jungle or the Andean Amazon. I went straight there with him. I reiterate, despite my strange words to my mother years before, I still had no personal inclination toward Peru. We landed, and I remember staring out the window of the plane at the endless, undulating green carpet of the Amazon jungle below. When we finally landed, Tarapoto felt incredibly primitive and raw. We disembarked and immediately loaded onto motorcars, those three-wheeled motorized carts so prevalent throughout South America and Asia. Three-wheeled motorized carts. The moment I settled onto that motocar and we began navigating the chaotic, dusty streets of Tarapoto, I experienced the single most profoundly liberating feeling of my life. Wow, I am finally out. I am free. I truly felt more profoundly at home in this completely foreign, developing country than I had ever felt in the stifling confines of Brook Park, Ohio. I had escaped. Yes, we would walk through the open-air market, which was a spectacle of sights and sounds, with vendors selling every imaginable creature. Monkeys, parrots, and even, shockingly, jaguars and condors. This was my initiation into buying food from an open-air market rather than a sanitized American grocery store. This raw, untamed reality resonated deeply with me. I felt like I was built for this environment. I adapted instantly and fell head over heels in love with the Amazon. I stayed with Alfonso for 1 month. By the time my mandatory return date arrived, I had engineered a meticulously clandestine plan. I told myself, okay, the door to Peru is clearly open now, so this is my mission. The plan was simple, reckless, and audacious. I would return home briefly, work for several months, save every dollar possible, and then go back to Peru. Critically, I would purchase a round-trip ticket, a mandatory return leg that I had absolutely zero intention of using. I knew my father would be frantic if he thought I was leaving permanently, so the ghost ticket was a necessary deception to ease his mind. Oh wow! My grand vision was to use the Amazon as my starting point, then simply keep moving, following the river east toward Brazil, and eventually find some way, anyway, to cross the ocean and make my way to Africa. It was a preposterous plan, poorly conceived, I'll admit, but I didn't care about the logistics. I only cared about the motion. I was simply going. And here is the crucial piece of context that explains everything. I had one overriding, desperate desire that fueled this entire enterprise. I wanted to have a tangible, life-altering, burning bush encounter with God. This spiritual quest was the beating heart of the whole trip. I need to clarify, I wasn't being rebellious or delinquent. I wasn't reckless in the sense that I lacked purpose. My sole aim was uncompromising. I needed to either experience God in a way that left no room for doubt, a genuine manifestation, or die trying in the pursuit of that knowledge. I was neither nihilistic nor suicidal. Yes, I was simply consumed by this singular mission. It wasn't just a trip. It was a bona fide spiritual quest, and I approached it as such. I will find a profound encounter with the divine or willingly perish in the attempt. I was fully prepared for either outcome. This was my adventure, full stop. I was utterly fearless, unburdened by obligations or concerns. Naturally, my father had no idea about this spiritual mandate. So, I adhered to the open door. I was starting in the Amazon. By the time I left for Peru the second time, I had exactly $400 in my pocket. Was that considered significant money in Peru back then? Back then, $400 felt enormous, maybe the equivalent of $4,000 now. Honestly, perhaps even $10,000 in local purchasing power. What year was this? Roughly 2005. I was 18 at the time and I'm 42 now, so you can calculate the exact year. I didn't even have enough savings to fly directly from Cleveland. I had to fly out of Miami because a ticket from Miami to Lima was a manageable $400 or $500 then. This meant taking a Greyhound bus all the way down to Miami. That journey alone is an education in itself. If you truly want to witness the overlooked, grittier underbelly of America, hop on a Greyhound. I can remember the scene vividly. My dad and my twin brother driving me to the Greyhound bus station. It was such a surreal experience, knowing they believed I was simply returning to Peru for a 3-month missionary trip, expecting me back. They thought I'd hang out with Alfonso and return on the flight I'd already purchased. In my mind, I was certain, nope, I'm not coming back. I genuinely believed I wouldn't see my family for a decade, or perhaps ever again. I had accepted that reality. I wasn't leaving out of spite or hatred for my family, but purely because my quest was more important than geography. I had a military rucksack. I wasn't military, but I had the bag, and that was it. Just that one bag. Now that I am a father myself with a 20-year-old son, I often reflect on that moment. What if it was him doing this? The pity I feel for my father now is immense. I bet. Imagine being the father dropping off his 18-year-old son at a bus station, thinking he's going on a short trip to a developing country, completely unaware that the son has no intention of returning. I have immense sympathy for my father now. Sorry, Dad. They dropped me off, and I remember looking at my dad and my twin brother, the knowledge weighing heavily. You think I'm returning, but I'm not. It wasn't an outward display of tears, but it was a profoundly emotional internal moment. This was it. I was truly committing. I was going for it. So, I took the Greyhound south to Miami and eventually found myself back in Tarapoto, reunited with Alfonso. And I just decided right then and there, I'm going to stay in Tarapoto for as long as it takes. My mission was twofold. Fully absorb the local culture, and become fluent in Spanish. That was the absolute core of my goal, and ultimately I achieved it. I secured a rental house just on the outskirts of the main part of town. This was actually the place that Alfonso, my primary contact and guide, used to live. Alfonso, by the way, was a truly phenomenal pastor and an absolutely awesome individual. I genuinely loved Alfonso. He was a genuinely wonderful man, alongside his wife, Carmen, who was Peruvian. He took me under his wing and essentially taught me the harsh but beautiful realities of living day to day in what we call a third world country. It was such a tremendous experience. He'd routinely take me deep into the dense jungle. He would go there to preach and he'd bring me along. That immersive exposure, day in and day out, was how I truly learned Spanish and how I learned to navigate the specific challenges and unspoken rules of life there. So, the comical detail about Alfonso's former rental is this. It was situated right on the edge of town, a very primitive dwelling. When I say primitive, I mean there was no indoor plumbing whatsoever. He suggested, "You really ought to rent this place. I used to live here." And then he dropped the punchline, The landlord's name was Hitler. Ancillary detail. Yeah. His name was actually Hitler. So, I ended up renting a house from Hitler in Tarapoto, right on the periphery of the town center. Back in those days, the US dollar stretched incredibly far. Yeah. Especially if you were someone like me. I was willing to live primitively. I could adapt to almost anything. I was honestly very wild at that point in my life. I had long hair, which eventually evolved into dreadlocks. But let me be clear, I was not a hippie. I was actually the absolute antithesis of a hippie. I was just untamed, completely feral. I felt truly free. One of the very first things I did upon arriving in Peru was to head straight to the market and buy some monkeys. That was my instinctual urge. I'm going to live with monkeys. I went down to the market and I bought 3 monkeys, all different species. My prized possession was a spider monkey, which was hands down the most intelligent. I named her Ma, M-Y-H-A. I literally just made the name up on the spot. Next, I acquired a squirrel monkey whom I christened Don Quixote. And finally, I had a third, a tamarin monkey, who was so profoundly dull-witted that I never bothered to give him a name. He was basically just a small, furry squirrel. So I didn't name him, and I'm probably inundating you guys with excessive information right now. I have no idea if anyone will find any of this remotely interesting, but you'll have to listen to find out. But I had one room in that house, the very house I was renting from Hitler. Everybody listening is thinking, no way. This story is just like the last time you were here and Mike Tyson was supposedly one of your buddies. So, this house I'm renting from Hitler, it must have had an interior bedroom that featured an indoor window. It had iron bars on it, suggesting it might have been an exterior window at some point that later got enclosed. I looked at that little barred enclosure one day and thought, that's where I'll put the monkeys. So I went and got the monkeys. I almost made an even stupider decision, though. I was standing there in the market, and again, let me stress, Peru is absolutely not like this anymore. They have thankfully cracked down hard on the trafficking of exotic animals, but as I stood there, I was moments away from buying a baby jaguar and a baby condor. Dude, I almost did it. It was a baby jaguar and a baby condor. And I stopped myself thinking, what exactly am I going to do with these? They get bigger. When they grow up, and if that jaguar, once it reaches adulthood, decides to eat the neighbor's child, well, that's not going to be a good situation. So I wisely settled for the monkeys instead. And did you simply feed them and talk to them, or was there more of an interaction? I fed them, and yes, I constantly talked to them. They were like my dogs. They were my companion animals. I had a huge, beautiful mango tree in the backyard, and I would spend hours just hanging out in that mango tree, reading, studying, and socializing with the monkeys. My neighbors, I genuinely loved these Peruvian neighbors, and to this day when I go back they recognize me and we chat. They were amazing people. In Tarapoto, on the outskirts, my neighbors would send their children over specifically so I could teach them English. They just wanted their kids to hang out with me and pick up some language skills. In exchange, they made me an offer. You come over to our house for lunch, and you go to the other family's house for dinner. Nice. I was like, that's a fantastic deal. A great arrangement. So the kids would arrive, I'd be up in my tree with the monkeys, and we would practice English. This interaction actually helped me a lot with my Spanish immersion. Then I would go over to one set of parents' houses for lunch, and another set for dinner. It was truly amazing. I adore the Peruvian people. They are incredible. And these were, financially poor people, but they were not poor in the modern American sense of being homeless or destitute. No, they were incredibly humble, hardworking jungle folk, and I adapted to everything, the Peruvian food, the culture, absolutely everything. I just absorbed it all into myself. And then, ultimately, skipping over a multitude of transitional details, I finally embarked on the serious quest of my journey, which led me deep, deep into the Amazon basin. This was in pursuit of the burning bush experience you've mentioned. Yes, the story I have never publicly disclosed. Are you planning on telling it publicly now? Do you want to share it? I did. Last year I went back up the river. I had previously lived in various parts of the Peruvian jungle around Tarapoto, then further north near Iquitos, and even spent time in the Andes. At one point, I lived with a family up the Masan River, which is a tributary to the Napo, which then pours into the Amazon itself. So I was right in that jungle area adjacent to the mighty Amazon River. I traveled far up the Masan River. There is practically nothing up there. The very last permanent village was called. I always confuse the name in my head. I want to call it Gamatana or maybe Gamatama, but it was the definitive last village. There might have been one or two isolated homesteads further on, but this was the end of the line for civilization. And I ended up there. I honestly can't even recall how I first found my way there, but I ended up developing an incredibly close bond with this particular family. That is the family unit that is referenced as the Mike Tyson and Grover analogy. This is a reference to the inside joke from our last episode. And the father, whose real name I don't even know, everyone just called him Pisano, that guy was a genuine character. He loved to drink local tequila and fish. So, I essentially became an adopted member of this family, and I learned so much during my time with them. I would visit them sporadically over the years, and recently I went back. Mike Cernovich was working on a documentary. In fact, he's doing 2 documentaries that are coming out this year. One on the UFO phenomenon, in which I am featured, and the other, which I am really excited about, is called Meaning. In Meaning, he features a lot of high-profile individuals. Tucker Carlson is in it. I'm trying to remember the other contributors. Scott Adams, who is sadly going through some health issues right now, is also in it. Mike, who is a good friend of mine, wanted me to take him and his crew up the river to this family I lived with, essentially to feature my full story. But what they really wanted was to coax out this intensely personal story that I had never told publicly. I told them, there's a fat chance that's going to happen. I'll take you up the river, but I'm probably not going to tell you this story. It's too personal, too bizarre, and I just don't feel comfortable sharing it. This is your burning bush story. Yeah, I just never thought it was necessary. I never really cared to have that experience out there for public consumption. So we traveled up the river, my son and I, though the family wasn't there anymore. It was a really fantastic trip. We rented a riverboat, the very same kind I used to use for that whole face peeler expedition. We all had a great time, and as I was sitting there on the Masan River, it suddenly dawned on me. This trip was marking the 22nd year anniversary of me fulfilling that original quest up that very river. I sat there thinking, this cannot be a mere coincidence. I hadn't planned the timing at all. It just occurred to me while sitting on the boat. Wow, this is literally to the day 22 years later. What an incredible coincidence. And I thought, this absolutely cannot be a coincidence. Okay, let's do it. Turn the cameras on. I'm going to tell the story right now. No way. Oh wow, that's amazing. Now, I don't know. It'll make the film. Oh, it will definitely make the film. I'm just uncertain how it will be received. It might make me look like a raving lunatic, though I doubt it. I trust Mike. I completely trust Mike Cernovich with handling this material. So, I don't know how it will play out. But I did tell my full story there on the Masan River, right where the experience originally happened. What an unbelievably powerful moment. Yeah, that is truly awesome. And I thought, you know what, I was 41 at the time and I thought I'm just going to finally do it. I never felt that telling the story would be profitable for anyone, and I never cared to do it. It was an extremely personal event that happened to me. I have told just a small part of it at my conference in Costa Rica, and that is available in my members community for anyone who wants to watch that. But I never told the full extent of that core experience. You know what, I never wanted to be one of those guys who is primarily known for one single crazy encounter they had. I didn't want to be that guy. I want people. I want to be the person who can conduct good research and investigations and simply report things that I believe to be truthful. But I don't want to be the guy who is defined by having had this wild, prophetic or deeply bizarre experience. I never wanted that. I decided right then that I was going to stay in Tarapoto for precisely as long as it took to fully immerse myself. Mastering not only the Spanish language but penetrating the deep, intricate layers of the local culture. This was my singular goal, and I achieved it. I secured a lease on a very basic dwelling situated right on the dusty fringes of the town, a place Alfonso, who served as my primary guide and mentor, had previously occupied. Alfonso was more than just a pastor. He was a phenomenal, genuine man, a true force of good. I developed immense respect and admiration for him and his wife, Carmen, who was native Peruvian. He took me under his wing, essentially giving me a masterclass in navigating the realities of life in a developing nation. Our classroom wasn't a school. It was the dense, suffocating jungle. He frequently ventured deep into the wilderness to minister, to preach, and I was always right there beside him. Through those grueling, sweat-soaked expeditions, hearing the gospel delivered in rapid-fire regional Spanish while learning to handle everything from mosquitoes to logistics, I forged my grasp of the language and simultaneously absorbed the visceral lessons required for survival in the Third World. The house itself was extraordinarily primitive, no indoor plumbing, just the absolute necessities. Alfonso encouraged me, saying, "You should rent this house. I lived here myself." The most surreal detail of that entire arrangement was the landlord's name, Hitler. Ancillary detail. Yeah. His name was Hitler. It was just a strange, shocking, and frankly bizarre detail of my life in Tarapoto, renting a house from a man named Hitler on the fringes of the Peruvian jungle. And back then, the economic realities meant the dollar stretched impossibly far, especially for someone living like me. I was living primitively, adapting instantly to the lack of amenities. I was wild, truly feral, sporting long hair that eventually twisted into thick dreadlocks. But understand this. I was the antithesis of a hippie. I wasn't peaceful or gentle. I was unbound, completely free, driven by impulse. One of my first major acts upon arriving in Peru was walking straight into the local market and buying monkeys. My immediate thought process was simple and bizarre. I'm going to live with monkeys. I acquired 3 monkeys, each a different species, establishing a small primate kingdom. The leader was a spider monkey, clearly the most intelligent of the group, whom I named Ma, a spontaneous, invented name. Next, I had a squirrel monkey, whose frantic energy earned him the slightly more dignified name of Don Quixote. Finally, there was the third, a tiny tamarin monkey. Honestly, he was just too dim-witted to warrant the effort of naming. He acted purely on instinct, like a slightly evolved squirrel, so he remained nameless. I had a room in this house, the house I was renting from Hitler. Everybody hears that and they're thinking, no way. This is like the last time when Mike Tyson was somehow one of your acquaintances. In the house I was leasing from Hitler, there was a strange interior room, a bedroom, which featured an internal window that had metal bars across it, suggesting it was once an exterior wall. I immediately assessed the situation. Perfect containment, I thought. I'll put the monkeys in there. The truth is, I almost made a monumentally stupid decision at that market. I should point out that Peru is heavily regulated now, thankfully clamping down on the trafficking of exotic animals. But back then, everything was available. I stood there, utterly tempted, nearly buying a baby jaguar and a young condor. I was inches away from committing to this insane life choice. Dude, I almost did. I looked at the little predators and thought, asterisk, what happens when they grow up? They get bigger. If that adult jaguar eats a neighbor's child, that's going to be a problem. Nah, that's not a good idea. So I wisely settled for just the monkeys. And did you just feed them and talk to them, or was there? I fed them and talked to them. They were like dogs for you. They were fantastic companions. Truly, they were like strange, furry, highly active dogs. My daily routine was spending hours in the enormous mango tree in the backyard, reading, studying, meditating, and sharing my space with my primate crew. My neighbors, whom I still adore and visit to this day, were incredible people living on the outskirts of Tarapoto. They established a wonderful arrangement. They would send their children over daily, hoping I would tutor them in English, or at least have them hang around me to absorb some of the language. In return, they gave me a phenomenal deal. They told me, "You must come eat lunch and dinner with us every day." Nice. I was like, okay, good deal. A great deal. I happily accepted. The kids would show up. I'd be up in the mango tree with Ma and Don Quixote, and we'd practice rudimentary English. This reciprocal teaching process actually forced me to solidify my Spanish rapidly. I rotated between families for lunch and dinner, embracing the amazing Peruvian people. They were humble, jungle-dwelling folk, economically poor, perhaps, but not in the devastating, destitute sense of Western poverty or homelessness. They were rich in community and spirit. I assimilated entirely, adopting the food, the customs, and the culture wholeheartedly. This period of deep immersion was the crucible, ultimately preparing me for the next phase of my journey, venturing deep into the Amazon. This was for the burning bush experience. This experience is something I have actively shielded from public knowledge until very recently. Do you want to tell it publicly? I have lived throughout the Peruvian jungle near Tarapoto, up towards Iquitos, and also in the high Andes. But the specific location of the critical event was deep up the Mason River, a significant tributary to the Napo, which feeds directly into the main Amazon flow. I was living right in that incredibly dense jungle adjacent to the Amazon River itself. I traveled far up the Mason. There is almost nothing up there. The final, most remote village I usually mention, whose name I always struggle with, I want to call it Gamatana or something similar, was essentially the end of the line. I got extremely tight with a specific family unit there. The patriarch, whose actual name I never learned, everyone just called him Pisano, was an absolute force of nature. That guy was a character. He was defined by his love of drinking tequila and fishing. I effectively became an adopted member of their household, learning invaluable lessons about true self-reliance and jungle living. I would occasionally visit them over the years. Mike Cernovich, a friend of mine, began working on 2 documentaries, one on the UFO phenomenon in which I feature, and a second, more introspective film called Meaning, featuring high-profile figures like Tucker Carlson and Scott Adams, who is unfortunately passing away right now. Mike's true motivation was clear. He wanted to film the location of my story and subtly draw out the burning bush account I'd always kept hidden. I warned him, "Look, I'll take you up the river, but there is a fat chance I'm going to tell this story on camera. It's far too bizarre, intensely personal, and frankly, I never cared for that kind of notoriety. This is your burning bush story. I just never thought it necessary. I don't really care to have that out there." We embarked upriver with Mike and his crew. Though we found the specific family homestead empty, they had moved on. It was a fantastic expedition. We chartered a riverboat, the exact model I had used years ago for the infamous face peeler trip. It was a blast. As we cruised the Mason, I suddenly had a profound realization. I was sitting there, exactly 22 years to the day, the precise anniversary, of the culmination of that initial life-defining quest up that river. I couldn't process it as mere chance. This timing was an undeniable cosmic signal. I didn't plan it that way, it just struck me. Whoa, this is literally 22 years to the day. What a coincidence. I looked at the crew and announced, "This isn't a coincidence. Okay, let's do it. Turn the cameras on. I'm telling the story now." "No way." "Oh wow, nice. Now, I don't know how that's going to, it'll definitely make the film. I don't know how it's going to come across. I suspect there's a risk of coming across like a raving lunatic, though I trust Mike Cernovich implicitly with the footage. So I don't know. But the story is told on the Mason River at the exact spot where the experience occurred. What a moment. I was 41 at the time and I just surrendered to the moment. I had always kept it guarded because I never felt it was appropriate or useful to anyone else. It was intensely personal. I have shared a truncated version at my conference in Costa Rica, and that footage exists within my private members community, but I have never, until that moment on the boat, revealed the full, comprehensive extent of the incident. My core resistance was always this. I didn't want to be defined by one singular, potentially prophetic or wild spiritual encounter. I refused to be known primarily as the guy who had the crazy experience. I want my reputation to be grounded in meticulous research, solid investigation, and honest reporting of verifiable truth. I respect that about you for the record. I appreciate that. That's why I've always been very guarded about that story. By the way, it's Alberno analysis. COM, right? Yeah, the Alberno analysis. COM is my... Are you in there yet? In the actual community? No, not yet. Man, we go deep into stuff in there. Seriously, I'll be reviewing content and thinking, man, this is stuff a lot of people would benefit from. The reason I can do it there is because I'm totally unfiltered, and there are no trolls. It's like I'm unshackled, and I can talk about things that are far too controversial for YouTube. Well, I recommend it. I consume information like a trash compactor, and some of your series I'm listening to, and I have to stop walking through the airport and think, I can't process this right now. I have to sit down for a second. Yeah, it's really good. I've got some crazy people in the community too. Like crazy good military guys that have seen some stuff. Politicians. So did that story ever come out somewhere with Mike? It's coming. I'm a little bit nervous about it. Well, you should just tell it here to get ahead of it. I can't. It would take me way too long. It's too convoluted. This is not the experience that you talked about last time when it was about the revelation about Adam and the river? No, that was the sort of preamble. Got it. Yeah, you got close, but then... Yeah, that was the preamble. Nice. I've got to take a break real fast. But that was the best introduction I've ever heard on any podcast. I don't care what anyone thinks. We got monkeys. One of them was too dumb to have a name. He got eaten by a dog. Eaten by a dog. Demonstrating the justification of not giving him a name because he was too dumb. We are not changing that intro at all. It is the best intro I've ever heard for a podcast. He got eaten by a dog. His lung got punctured by a dog. I was holding him in my hands and he died. Seriously? What? He was just a tamarin. A Leonito, they called me. Oh my gosh. Time out. I'll be right back. Alright, we're back. You good? I'm doing great, man. That was fun. I kinda wanna go into, well, I wanna go to a lot of things. So, you just tell me when we run out of time or we get off limits. But eventually, I wanna make our way to UFOs. Okay. I don't wanna start there yet. I wanna pave our way there with super soldiers, genetic engineering giants. Is that okay? Wherever you wanna take me. So, you have a quote from your book, Modern Man is a Mutant. Which book is it? Birthright, which everyone should buy and read. If you haven't read Birthright, you have another one now on the Book of Enoch. Yeah. I wrote commentary. Introduction to the Book of Enoch. This is from Birthright. Modern man is a mutant. The core idea here is that the human species is basically experiencing genetic degeneration. Degeneration, debilitation. We're going backwards. We're devolving. And then you have an interesting perspective on genetic engineering and super soldiers. You kind of tie it to the golden race, the age of Apollo. Yeah. I don't know where your favorite. I was reading this morning about the World War II incidents around cannibalistic giants and stories of giants that are around today. Is there any unique, interesting research that you could share? Yeah, the famous Kandahar giant story. What is that? So, in 2005, well, okay, let me back up. I used to work with a guy named Steve Quayle. He's one of the old-school researchers and authors who was investigating the topic of biblical giants. Steve and I created a production company called Gen 6 Productions, and we were making a film series called the True Legends documentary film series. In the course of this endeavor, Steve was contacted by an elderly woman who told him that her son had a very important story to tell. She had been listening to Steve for a long time and encouraged her son to talk to him. It turns out that her son was an active-duty C-130 pilot who had allegedly picked up the body of a dead giant out of Bagram airfield in his C-130, the government C-130 that he flew. So, we decided to fly him into Bozeman to interview him for our film in the series. When he came to Bozeman, Steve and I had the opportunity to spend some time with him. He was willing to be interviewed, but he wanted to be interviewed in silhouette, so we didn't show his face, and he didn't want us to reveal his name. Aha! So, he showed us his credentials and he was active-duty C-130, and he struck me as a very genuine, honest guy. He didn't want money, he didn't want notoriety. His mom convinced him to tell Steve the story, and then he agreed to be featured in our film. I had the opportunity to interview him, and he told us that in 2005, he flew a mission into Bagram airfield. Now, this was not uncommon. He was flying routinely into Bagram airfield to pick up what he described as high-value assets, which were usually like high-level Taliban guys. Many of the missions he flew were classified. He thought this was a routine mission in 2005. On this particular occasion, he lands on the tarmac and he realized this was not a routine mission because he was met on the tarmac by who he believes were Air Force intelligence or Army intelligence. He didn't know, but he referred to them as the babysitters. And they escort him, which he had never been met on the tarmac by anyone before like that. They escort him over to the hangar where the cargo that he's got to load is sitting. As he's getting close to this cargo, the first thing that struck him was this pungent odor. He said it was very, very strong. It was like this musky odor. It was a combination of B.O. and death, and it was very powerful. And he realized there's something dead under a tarp on this crate, on this pallet. And as he's getting up close to this thing, he realizes that it's a person. And this is an air cargo pallet. So it's 9 feet long. Yeah. The body that's on this pallet, he's covered by a tarp. He's in the fetal position, but his hands and his feet and his head were visibly hanging off the edges of the pallet. This was a massive 9-foot-long air cargo pallet, yet this entity was too large for it. The sheer scale was what hit the pilot first. He immediately recognized that this was no normal human being. This was a gigantic person. He estimated the height had to be between 10 to 12 feet tall, certainly closer to the 12-foot mark. He approached the cargo, and there was a group of military personnel standing guard around it. He believed they were Marines, alongside what he called the babysitters, the intelligence operatives responsible for supervising the sensitive shipment. He was told that this giant, even curled into the fetal position, was still so large that portions of his body were dangling outside the boundaries of the pallet. Most of his torso was concealed by a heavy tarp, but the head was visible. He clearly saw the hair, which was unmistakably red, a shocking, vibrant red. He also saw the hands and the feet, both of which possessed a startling anomaly. 6 fingers and 6 toes. The massive feet were wrapped in what looked like crude, primitive footwear, a rough canvas, almost like a makeshift boot. The skin of the giant was described as startlingly white, almost pale white, like bleached bone. However, the pilot speculated this extreme pallor might simply be a result of death. The body had reportedly been deceased for a couple of days. He even recounted how he had pounded his fist against the body under the tarp, and it felt like hitting a brick. It was rigid, dense, solid muscle. Rigor mortis had set in. He said even by looking at the limited parts of the body sticking out from under the tarp, you could tell this guy was absolutely jacked, pure, uncompromising muscle. The soldiers guarding the body explained the harrowing background. They had heard that a team of men, likely special forces given the mission's nature, had been deployed. This was supposedly around 2005. I don't recall the exact troop commitment levels to Afghanistan then. Maybe it was earlier, but regardless, the story they were relaying was that this team had gone on a reconnaissance mission. They were deep in the Kandahar region of Afghanistan when they came upon a secluded cave. Nearby was a small village, and the soldiers observed the local villagers depositing various offerings, food items and other supplies, at the mouth of the cave. The immediate assumption was that these locals were aiding and abetting Taliban fighters who must be hiding within. So the team entered the cave. But instead of the expected Taliban ambush, they were instantly confronted by this very large, exceedingly hostile giant, who proceeded to kill the entire team. A second team was then dispatched to go and find their missing comrades. They followed the tracks and located the area where the last transmissions from the first team had originated. The story goes that when the second team entered the cave, the giant was literally consuming the bodies of the soldiers it had just slaughtered. The second team engaged the entity and, after a severe struggle, they were able to take him down. Now, there is a slightly different account, a parallel story shared by my colleague Ella Marcully, where a whistleblower approached him about a similar incident, perhaps the same one or a related event, where the giant reportedly speared one of the members of the second team. That might be a separate narrative, but I'm not 100% certain. In any case, they killed the giant, and then they airlifted him out by helicopter, transporting the remains to Bagram airfield. This is where our pilot picked up the narrative. He was there specifically to load the massive body onto the transport aircraft. Before it could be loaded onto the C-130, the cargo had to be meticulously weighed. The load master processed the total weight, which came to 1,500 pounds. After subtracting the known weight of the standard air cargo pallet, they determined the body itself weighed precisely, or approximately 1,100 pounds. That 1,100-pound figure was the official weight logged for the manifest being loaded onto the C-130. So, a 12-foot-tall, 1,100-pound monster with 6 fingers and 6 toes. After loading the cargo, the pilot's next leg was to fly it to Qatar for unloading. He later told me that he heard through the military grapevine that the deceased giant ultimately made its final transit to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He couldn't confirm that destination for sure, but that was the persistent rumor circulating among transport crews. We featured this explosive story in our documentary, and Steve interviewed the pilot on Coast to Coast AM. The story immediately exploded across the internet and has since taken on an almost mythological status. However, I have personally confirmed the validity of that account several times with different military personnel. I spoke to one guy, a very high-ranking Air Force officer, who told me he could confirm the story and then shared an additional tale that was even more shocking, which I unfortunately don't have the liberty to disclose publicly in order to protect his identity. But the story of the Kandahar giant has been confirmed to me multiple times. As I've often mentioned on various podcasts, I frequently encounter different people within the government and military circles. I always seize the opportunity to ask them about UFOs, crash retrievals, and alien bodies. These people are surprisingly candid with me. They will share unbelievable things when you're sitting there, smoking a cigar and drinking an old-fashioned, in a setting far removed from any official context. Things they would never say publicly, right? Yeah. And they'll tell you things and freely. But the absolute moment you start to question them about the Kandahar giant or the general topic of giants, these guys instantly freeze up. They will happily discuss encounters with aliens, but if you pivot the conversation to giants, that opens up a whole different, far more serious level of trouble, to put it mildly. I shared this account with a friend of mine, and I was actually at Lou Elizondo's bar in Wyoming at the time. I was sitting there with a friend I had met there, recounting the story. He admitted he wasn't sure if he believed it. Later, without giving away any specific operational details, my friend was with a, let me be careful and ambiguous here, a staffer for A.U.S. Senator, a friend of the staffers. This staffer had extensive military experience and served at a pretty high level. During a casual conversation, my friend mentioned, "Hey, I was just with Timothy Alberino, and he told me this crazy story about the Kandahar giant. Do you know anything about that?" Just casually throwing it out there. The staffer was usually a very jovial and casual guy, and they had a great relationship. However, my friend said the moment he mentioned Kandahar giant, the staffer went dead serious instantly. He looked my friend straight in the eye and demanded, "Hey, what exactly are you getting yourself into? Please be careful." Wow, be careful. This was a clear, unambiguous warning. He told him in no uncertain terms, "Be careful with this topic. This is dangerous." My friend was absolutely shocked by that intense reaction because he had never seen his buddy react like that before. To him, that startling reaction was confirmation enough that this story was real. And I've received much more direct confirmations than just a vague "be careful." Yeah. I've had guys tell me stories that are, like I said, even wilder than the one I just told you. The thing about the Kandahar giant is that it's not just one giant. Giants. It is giants, plural. I've even had someone show me on a map precisely where these giants are located. Real quick before you go into that, do you think these giants survived, or is it genetic engineering? I assume these are the offspring of the Canaanite Nephilim, or perhaps a different offshoot, generally speaking, from the Mesopotamian Nephilim. And they have survived. They are still living, but they are incredibly primitive, feral, and hostile. They are extremely dangerous and profoundly evil. How do I draw that conclusion from one dead giant? I don't. I derive this understanding from other accounts that I am not permitted to share. But they are evil. They are very evil creatures. And when you bring up this topic, the reaction is immediate. I'll just share this quick anecdote. I was at a conference and there was a gentleman there who was, I have to be really careful here, a high-level operator who had been in Afghanistan during that critical period of time. We had been talking candidly about various subjects. He was a really amazing guy and a strong believer in certain unconventional truths. As he was walking away, I remembered he was in Afghanistan around that time. I said, "Hey, let me ask you a quick question." He paused. "Yeah, sure." I asked, "You were in Afghanistan around 2005. What do you know about the Kandahar giant?" The blood instantly drained from his face. He froze and pointed frantically toward his phone, signaling, "Nope, I can't. Nope." He was utterly shocked and terrified that I had even brought it up. "What year was this that you asked him about that?" "A couple of years ago." And his wife, who was standing right next to me, physically pulled down my shirt and whispered urgently in my ear, He cannot talk about that. Wow. Well, I have to stop there. I don't want to get this guy into trouble. But let's just say I have spoken to individuals who have direct, first-hand knowledge. Not second-hand knowledge. Yeah, they were there. They didn't hear it from a guy who heard it from a guy. They encountered these beings themselves. Yeah. So this is the one subject. I was just talking about this with Michael Knowles, and I told Michael, this is the one topic that I talk about, especially on a show as large as yours, that makes me nervous. It's the one thing that makes me never want to get on a private jet. Let's put it that way. It seems the topic of giants is classified at a higher level than virtually anything else. And I hypothesize that the reason this is the case is because it is so intricately entwined with the occult. There is a deep, dark connection here. I believe there are high-level occult practitioners who are actively practicing necromancy and are attempting to use the physical remains of the giants to summon the spirits of the giants, which we understand to be demons. MHM. And you can contact them, and they're still in the world, and I think that they still have some sort of a connection to their remains. And if you can get the remains of the giants, you can summon their spirits. Necromancy. It's necromancy, and this is the origin of necromancy. It's Canaanite necromancy, which I believe high-level practitioners of the occult are engaging in today. We are talking about the very top of the occult pyramid here. And so, again, I always feel a lump in my throat when I discuss the Kandahar giant publicly. Well, the cat's out of the bag now. I mean, putting it in a documentary about giants is one thing, but talking about this subject on a show like yours that gets millions of views, or going on the Daily Wire and talking about the Kandahar giant. Yeah. That is a whole other level of exposure. Well, it's not just in the Middle East because the Solomon Islands are in the Pacific. The Solomon Islands. Yes. I believe there are living giants in the Solomon Islands. Same conditions. They live in caves, they're largely underground, and they're hidden. In some parts of the world, these giants are venerated. What does that mean? They're worshipped. Yes. Other parts of the world, they are hated and hunted. Did you see anything in Peru that, looks like giant of all men or no? Peru has many documented historical incidences where the Spanish conquistadors encountered the bones of giants. These records clearly state that in at least some of these cases, the remains were gigantic humanoids, not dinosaurs, not giant sloths, and certainly not mammoths. Furthermore, the indigenous natives in Peru have extensive legends of giants. Specifically, red-haired giants that allegedly came from over the sea on reed boats. That detail is incredibly interesting because the Phoenicians utilized reed boats, among other vessels, and red hair was a Phoenician trademark. That's why if you travel to Italy today, specifically to Sardinia, you will still see Italians with distinctly red hair. Where did that come from? The Phoenicians. In fact, genetic tests conducted on the Sardinians, the people who inhabit the island of Sardinia, revealed that they have very prominent Phoenician genetic markers. Hence the red hair. Interesting. So I believe that the giants were dispersed around the world by the Phoenicians, who had contact with different continents, contrary to the prevailing view of global isolationism. I believe the Phoenicians were crossing the oceans, and among their traveling party were giants. The Phoenicians themselves maintained a cult of giant worship, which they then exported across the globe. So, yes, I do believe there are living giants today. They are feral, they are dangerous, and they are highly classified. With that, there is obviously scriptural backing for this in multiple places, including in Genesis 6. Then you see the land of Canaan being riddled with giants all over the place, which is obviously terrifying. But the question that keeps popping up in my mind, and I know we haven't really gotten to it, is what do you see as the actual significance and ramifications of this being true that people are so afraid of people knowing? What does that mean for everybody else? Why do you think people are so afraid to talk about it? Because it implicates the occult. And it's classified at that level. There is something about this topic that strikes pure, paralyzing fear into these people. Again, they will freely tell me about crash retrievals and alien bodies, not a big deal. Giants? Nothing. They refuse to say anything. A few specific individuals have shared details, but most of the people I talk to absolutely clam up about giants. Again, the only thing I can surmise is that this is classified at an exceptionally high level, and people who have talked about it have gotten into serious trouble. They must have been warned severely. And again, it has to be because it is so interlaced with the occult at the highest levels of power. Nothing else makes sense. It's not like, big deal, there were giants. People often say the prevailing idea among Christians is that they're hiding the giants because it proves the Bible. Well, finding giants proves all the mythologies of the ancient peoples, right? Everyone has legends of giants: Native Americans, the Mesopotamians, obviously the Canaanites, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Norse. Everyone. It doesn't specifically validate only the biblical text. So that's a weak argument. That's not why they're hiding this. Other people claim, well, it invalidates the theory of evolution by natural selection. No, not really. All the scientific establishment has to do is say, oh, this was just a different, large branch of evolution. Done. Offshoot. Yeah. It doesn't invalidate the theory of evolution either. It has to be something else. Again, all I can conclude is that it's the occult, and I dare I say we are talking Podesta-level occultism here. So, Clinton-level occultism, if I may be so bold. Just truly bold. Well, I'm surprised that there could be a side of reverse engineering genetic enhancement as well. I think that's a part of the equation. I do. I believe there's some genetic. I know Steve Quayle believes that there's a program, a super soldier program, where they are actively looking for these remains of the giants or the living giants and using their DNA in some kind of black budget project. Would we be surprised though? No, but this is what Hitler was doing as well, like, not specifically with giants, but, yeah, they're trying to breed the master race. Yes. Are you guys familiar with Tom Horn? The late Tom Horn? Yeah. Tom was a friend of mine, and Steve and I had done a lot of work with Tom in our films. Tom told us a story, and he shared it publicly. We even featured it in one of our films. This story he said that he was given, and Tom passed away recently a couple of years ago in 2023. Tom was an amazing man, a phenomenal writer, and a great researcher. Tom said that someone from the military contacted him and shared some video files, warning him that the material was highly classified and to be extremely careful with it. It was security camera footage, supposedly from inside the History Museum in Baghdad. The footage reportedly depicted U.S. military personnel entering the museum, going into the back repository rooms, and removing gigantic sarcophagi from the museum's storage. Tom was told that what they were removing in this footage were the bodies of dead giants that had been hidden away in the museum's repository. The footage showed these large sarcophagi being carried out by U.S. military personnel and loaded onto transport helicopters. Tom was told in no uncertain terms that this was one of the major, underlying reasons why the coalition went into Baghdad, to secure the bodies of these giants that they knew were being housed in that museum. Tom told that story publicly. He shared it in our film and he said it in many interviews. Shortly after receiving that footage and downloading it to his computer, he was with his wife, Nita, in their kitchen just chatting. Suddenly, they heard loud crackling in the walls, like 1,000 firecrackers going off, and his house immediately went up in flames, burning completely to the ground. What? Everything he had was lost. The one thing Tom really lamented was his remarkable library of ancient texts and books. He was extremely proud of his collection. He lost everything. His house burned down, including that computer and the files, the video footage of this incident. So again, this is highly classified stuff. I know. To be true, and I'm out here talking about it and I'm not doing it for clicks. I can assure you, I'm doing it because I think the topic is intrinsically important, dealing with the foundations of human history and our future. I stand as an enemy of the occult, actively opposing these occult practitioners and their dangerous agenda. So that's why I talk about these things, exposing them to the light. And I firmly believe that somebody, likely high-level deep state operators, is intensely interested in the bodies of giants, specifically their preserved genetic and biological material for a super soldier program or something equivalent, a biogenetic enhancement program. But there is also a critical occult aspect to this pursuit. Yeah. If you can somehow utilize the bodies of giants, the physical remains of the Nephilim, to contact their disembodied, wandering spirits, the demons that were their conscious essence, then you can possibly extract ancient knowledge through these powerful beings. They are echoes from an impossibly ancient time. You can finish what the original Watchers started. Exactly. That is precisely the terrifying implication. Yeah, that's right. That's a very good insight. By accessing these relics, you can glean forbidden knowledge, and you can perhaps harness this power, this inherent demonic energy, channeling it for some strategic, military, or geopolitical advantage. And so, when you combine those two terrifying things, super soldier programs focused on genetic harvesting with the darkest applications of the occult, you can understand why this entire operation would be very, very highly classified, perhaps the most closely guarded secret on the planet. And the Vatican is involved as well. And I don't say that glibly or as a cheap accusation. I say that based on my extensive investigative experience. You said the Vatican's involved in this massive cover-up? Yeah. I say that based on my first-hand investigations on the island of Sardinia and in my interviews with multiple individuals, knowledgeable sources who told me directly that the Vatican had dispatched certain priests who were actively working to destroy, suppress, or fully extirpate the evidence of giants from the archaeological record in Sardinia, and simultaneously collecting some of the physical remains for transfer. It wasn't just the Vatican either. Also involved were some academics from the capital city of Cagliari back in I believe it was in the early 80s when that highly sensitive operation was happening. So, there's a tremendous amount of compelling evidence to be said about the persistent reality of giants, and again, when we talk about this, we're not talking about exceptionally tall modern men or NBA players here. We're talking about true mythological giants that are reliably reported to be 9 to 15 feet tall. That's the consistent size range when you review the first-hand testimony. And this isn't just anecdotal in Sardinia. These are reliable accounts from local people who dug up the bodies themselves with their own hands. Okay. The remains they found indicated beings 9 to 12 to 15 feet tall. Here in the United States, the legends of the Native Americans consistently speak of them being 9 to 12 to 15 feet tall. You can read in the Smithsonian's own archives about six-fingered giants. Again, you read consistently of remains that suggest 9 to 12 to 15 feet tall. So, these are genuinely massive beings. They are certainly not NBA players. Taking your core assertion, I want to put this into the theological implications of it, connecting the ancient story to the modern reality. You go back to Genesis 6, the catastrophic incursion of the Watchers. Tom Horn, God rest his soul, always maintained that the rebellion was biological, not just merely moral. It was a biological corruption designed to contaminate the human lineage. Tom had a very particular perspective on this. He viewed the Watchers' incursion as them looking for what he always termed fit extensions. I personally have a slightly different view. What does that mean exactly? I don't know what fit extensions means in that context. So Tom, in his research and writings, posited that the Watchers were looking for fit extensions in that they could extend themselves into, in other words, something akin to possessing or overshadowing men. Who would then copulate with women, and that's how the Watchers supposedly procreated. I just don't think that's true because you have to deal with, which we've talked about extensively on your show, you have to deal with what I call the fundamental first cause of the Watchers' rebellion, which is raw, unadulterated lust. MHM. And you are simply not going to fulfill your intensely lustful impulse through somebody else's body. I mean, you could try to rationalize that if you can possess somebody, but that simply doesn't fit the clear narrative of the biblical story. A Watcher possessing a man who copulates with a woman doesn't produce a giant, because you are using that possessed man's semen. You are using that man's genetic material. It just doesn't make any sense genetically. And it is crystal clear in the ancient texts that the Watchers themselves had direct sexual intercourse with human women. That's absolutely crystal clear. And I don't think that Tom would necessarily deny that fundamental fact, but I'm just trying to illustrate that he had a very nuanced and sometimes complex view. MHM. Of this ancient situation. But Tom was wonderfully open to a lot of ideas. That was the fun thing about him. Conversations with Tom Horn were always invigorating because Tom was so deeply intellectual for one thing, tremendously well-read, and was just open to debating all kinds of ideas. He loved to kick around concepts, even some things he wouldn't say publicly. He just loved to kick around ideas. And, especially over a glass of wine with ice in it. With ice? Ice. Yeah, he would put ice in his wine. And, one of my favorite people in the world, Tom Horn. And it was a genuine tragedy. I had some of the best, most fun times I've ever had in my life was being with Steve Quayle and Tom Horn together. All three of us, doing stuff like when we were filming out in the desert Southwest. It was just an absolute blast. But that was years ago. That was back when I was a young whippersnapper. Now you're mature and wise, and I'm becoming a curmudgeonly fountain of morals of wisdom. But old man, I implore you, let's decry it on this topic to connect back. The first I agree with you was physical esoteric impregnation, which is exactly what the text says. But then there seems to be a hard spiritual limit on that, where that's like either not allowed anymore or it's been specifically blocked by divine intervention. And now, if you can genetically, like the first was esoteric impregnation, now it seems the modern effort is going to be genetic engineering to complete the same destructive arc. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we definitely have the technology today to successfully generate true Nephilim again. Well, the question is, like, is it still, I think the key question in my mind is, like, did they just survive the flood and everything? Like, have they been physically alive the whole time because they're from demonic spirits? Or are they still somehow breeding naturally? Yeah, they have to be breeding or their spirits are being rehoused. But they're not immortal in the physical sense. We're not actively creating these giants in labs in Afghanistan. Otherwise, our specialized team that went in and allegedly got eaten would have been properly briefed on it. We are not manufacturing them. We are, however, studying them intensely. We're probably at this point maybe captured some of them. Perhaps we've captured some alive. I mean, if it were me and I was running these highly classified programs, I would absolutely want a live one. Yeah. So, and I'm not even necessarily saying there's anything inherently nefarious about trying to capture a live giant or study it from a purely scientific perspective. I think that impulse is natural. I think if there's a dinosaur out there roaming around, we'd probably want to go capture it and study it, right? I would do the exact same thing. Yeah. So, but there was an instance, and I got to be really, really careful here. I don't ever want to get anybody in trouble. You better not. Yeah. Okay. Let me just put this in these precise terms. There's strong reason to believe, that there are a core group of high-level operators at a very high echelon who are committed Christian believers. And I'm not necessarily talking about the famous Collins elite. We could talk about that specific group later. I mean guys that are Christians who are well informed about the reality of the Genesis 6 affair, and the Nephilim who are currently operating in the mix at the highest levels of the intelligence and military communities. I found that to be incredibly encouraging when somebody told me that. And it wasn't just some random person giving me this tip. Yeah. When they told me that they were clearly encouraged when they encountered this group, and I was encouraged when they told me because I thought, okay, we've got some really good guys fighting the good fight. It's not just that everything in the government is uniformly bad. No, it's always a mixed bag. There are very, very good people who are positioned the classic white hats in the intelligence community. Now, I don't simp, is that is that what the young people are saying these days? White hats? I don't simp for the intelligence community, or shill for the intelligence community. I don't. But I always maintain a very complex view of people. When you talk about an agency or institution, ultimately you're talking about complex people. And there's an eclectic, messy mix of people in these immense institutions. And yes, you do have good guys even within the CIA. And in many cases, I personally believe it's these good guys who keep people like me out of serious trouble. And I certainly know it's the good guys who keep the people who tell me things, my sources, out of trouble. So, to those generals, admirals, and high-level intelligence people who happen to be Christians and are picking up on the specialized chatter from guys like me, thank you. I can seriously use the help. I think it's so awesome what you're doing. Keep an eye on me when I inevitably get on a watch list. Please keep an eye on me when I get on a prop plane and fly over the Amazon. Yeah, dude. But I think it's so awesome what you're doing though, Tim, because it's like, I was just talking to a friend about this earlier. When you look at places like Africa, we talk about it on the show. And of course South America as well, there's a raw, undeniable reality that this ancient history is all still real. I think at least for people like me who was just kind of operating in a little bit of a theological bubble, honestly at times, you just kind of read Genesis and you're like, okay, cool, like there were giants in Genesis 6, that's wonderful, let's keep going, like there was a flood and there was this. But I love what you do in the sense that it really forces people to keep in perspective that this is a reality that is still active today. And that's that there is no other reality that's worth living in. This is a term Steve Quayle told me this one time, and then I heard it from some military guys. They refer to these topics, giants, aliens, Genesis 6, the cyclic cataclysm theory, all these kind of things. It's referred to in certain high-level circles as core reality. Core reality. I always thought that would be a cool name for like a TV show. That's a great name. Core reality. And so this is precisely what they refer to as core reality. These specific topics. And this is what the deep black, highly compartmented projects are deeply involved in. And some of those projects are innocuous, perhaps, in the sense that there's nothing inherently nefarious about them. They're just trying to investigate and truly understand and gain specialized knowledge. And some of them are highly nefarious. Human experimentation, for example, is certainly involved. Genetic experimentation, underground base stuff, illicit activities that happen in these deeply buried, secret underground bases. So it gets incredibly dark. And I think that the congressmen and women who are looking into these topics, and I mean all these topics, mind you, MHM, not just aliens, are beginning to encounter this dark reality. That there's something truly very nefarious going on here, and it's deeply embedded. And this is what people don't understand. I was on a podcast last night, and I was ranting about this, and it was a little bit too unfiltered. So, I'm going to be a little bit more filtered here. Okay. A little bit more restrained, hopefully. Wow. You must have gone off the deep end, man. There's a massive population of armchair skeptics on social media, and these skeptics have allowed themselves to become full-fledged, baseless accusers. And unfortunately, a lot of these accusers also identify as Christians. And if there's one thing you absolutely don't want to be as a Christian, you don't want to be a baseless accuser, because we know who the accuser is. And you certainly don't want to be acting like him. MHM. And I think Christians forget this fundamental truth when they interact online. I think they feel like they have a license to go out there and their digital self can transform into a depraved bastard. MHM. Right? And they feel like they have license to do this. They absolutely don't. Your digital self is nothing less than an extension of your actual, true character. MHM. And so it's incredibly easy to sit back and label people as a liar or accuse them of peddling psyops or shilling for this, that, or the other thing. It's incredibly easy to fling libel around because there are zero immediate consequences. Your digital person is out there in the world, MHM. Excuse my French, but out there acting like a total jerk. And yet, not and anonymously for the most part. And there's a lot of bots out there doing that too. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of people, and this is what I was talking about last night, again, on a different podcast, there's a lot of people who are chiming in on the UFO stuff now who are, number one, complete newcomers. They don't have the necessary historical background to truly process this complex phenomenon. They're new. They're only just coming to the table now, often after rolling their eyes about this topic their entire life. Suddenly, they proclaim, okay, it's real. But here's the definitive answer to it. It's like, I'm sorry, but that's like dropping out of high school, like me, and then going to an elite physics conference with high-level physicists and mathematicians and being like, nah, I don't think so. I don't think that these equations are real. This is just a deception. That's exactly what it's like. I mean, no, you just don't get it. You don't understand the depth. You don't have the foundational background to make that authoritative assessment. Yeah. And the central problem is we now have substantial material. We now have clear, courageous testimony out there by legitimate whistleblowers, and these guys are demonstrably telling the truth, and everyone is accusing them of lying. And I was with Lou Elizondo just the other day, and Lou told me, he said, it's so strange. We're finally telling the truth, and nobody believes us. Crazy. And when he says, we're finally, it refers to elements of the government finally acknowledging this deep reality. And these whistleblowers who were high up in the government, Lou was in government. David Grush was in government. And they're coming forward and they're saying, hey, American people, there's a crash retrieval program, a legacy crash retrieval program that has been operating in the black. Because everybody wants to knock these guys and automatically say, these guys are all just CIA government liars, psyop, deception. And I'm always saying, whoa. If you're going to sling this specific libel around, you're going to call this guy a liar. I don't care about the simple mistakes that were made publishing some fake photos of UFOs. I know, for example, that Lou Elizondo feels he was deeply embarrassed by those mistakes he made. Okay. He was overly enthusiastic and rushed the data. He presented these photos on a couple occasions without doing the essential due diligence and making sure he vetted them properly. I've made that mistake before. Everybody I know, Richard Dolan, who's the preeminent UAP historian of our time, has made that mistake. We all make that mistake in this highly speculative field. And so, because Lou, for people who don't know, Lou is one of the primary whistleblowers who testified under oath, because I don't know why, but Google just decided to start listening to me right now. Hey, there you go. And that is a gray alien on my phone there. So, yeah, I want to ask you about the gray, because Lou Elizondo was associated with Army intelligence and was involved in counterintelligence. Everybody automatically assumes that he is, by definition, perpetrating counterintelligence on us, the public. He must be, because that's what he did in the Army. Well, first of all, counterintelligence doesn't inherently mean you deceive people. That's not what counterintelligence is fundamentally about. Everybody thinks counterintelligence means your job is to deceive people. No, it's not. Counterintelligence is when your job is to go find out what the enemy knows. That's counterintelligence. What intelligence does the enemy possess? So you counter it? Exactly. That's true counterintelligence. And everybody thinks counterintelligence means you're a professional liar. Come on, get educated, people. Counterintelligence is finding out what the enemy knows and neutralizing that knowledge. That's it. That's what Lou did. And I'm not here to, my job isn't. I'm not paid by Lou Elizondo, okay? Lou is a friend and a source. And the I could say the same for Grush. People dunk on Grush because he worked for the government. So what? That's why they know what they know. And you know what they're telling you? They're telling you that these illegal, highly illegal programs, operating in deep shadow, have been developing in darkness outside of congressional oversight, and that very nefarious things have been happening. And these legacy programs have been recovering crashed UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomena. Non-human technology and non-human biological entities have been recovered for decades, and we don't have democratic oversight over this program. Oh, so here's what might help. Can we give a 20-minute ufology crash course? Because I think most... Do you know who Bob Lazar is? MHM. Jeremy Corbell? Not that name. President Eisenhower reportedly met with the Greys, and there's all this 1954, the GA. The Great Accord. So, the audience probably doesn't even know that context, which is probably like most people. If you haven't gone into UFOs or aliens on the show, you're the first one, that we've had on the show. So, people might be like, nasty comments incoming. People are used to those about flat Earth. Welcome to UFOs. Oh, that's right. Yeah. People are used to the vehement defense of the truth, especially because that's our style. But they may not know what you're talking about. They might be unable to follow. Okay. Well, okay. So, there's an extensive, dedicated body of historical research in the background in what is properly called ufology. And it's not ufology. It's ufology. And I'm not pointing at you guys, specifically. It's just everybody. I hear so many people, even like congressional people and stuff, saying ufology. 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 So, ufology is the serious, disciplined study of UFOs/UAPs. Now, a lot of people would dismissively assume, whatever. I mean, what are you going to learn? Whatever. You're studying flying saucers. No. There are verifiable facts that have been established, and this drives me nuts. It drives my friend Richard Dolan crazy. There are basic facts that have been established through competent, dedicated research by brilliant people over decades that have just been crumpled up and thrown in the garbage by the newcomers who think they know everything. MHM. You can't do that if you claim to be pursuing truth. Not if you're going to be intellectually honest. People like the late Leonard Stringfield, who in his UFO reports was writing about and thoroughly documented the reality of crash retrieval, the existence of the covert legacy program decades ago, starting in the 70s, long before the internet. And his daughter, Colette, contacted me, and I've had a privileged relationship with Stringfield's material and with his daughter, she sent me some of his source materials and things, and I was very honored by that because Stringfield was an old-school, top-tier investigator. Okay. There was no internet in the 70s. These guys were literally risking their lives back then, often traveling cross-country to go track down the stories, talk to the witnesses, and document the facts. Interview the military personnel, they went to the bases, they tracked down the reports. I mean, these guys were doing the serious, heavy-duty, boots-on-the-ground investigative footwork that is just so hard to replicate today, and they were able to collect a tremendous amount of verifiable data. And that data, in my estimation, and I think any serious researcher who is worth their salt would attest to this, is overwhelmingly conclusive. We're not talking about just a fleeting glimpse of a light in the sky here. No, you are tracking down multiple witnesses who were there, who had first-hand knowledge of crash retrievals, of military cover-ups, and they meticulously documented every aspect of it. And there is an immense amount of documentation available, and that's just dealing with the crash retrieval side of the phenomenon. Then you have scholarly minds like Stanton Friedman, a man of exceptional rigor. Stanton Friedman was a bona fide nuclear physicist who devoted a significant portion of his professional career to meticulously investigating the Roswell event and numerous other associated cases. He approached this entire topic not from a place of sensationalism, but from a highly intellectual, professional, and skeptical scientific standpoint. He demanded empirical evidence, and his work represents another critical branch of this entire research discipline. And, of course, you have some of the really old-school pioneers, individuals like Donald Keyhoe and others who were out there in the 50s and 60s openly discussing this topic when it was professionally ruinous to do so. And then, shifting into the realm of alien abduction, you find researchers who were equally competent and rigorous, again, operating entirely before the pervasive noise of the Internet era. They were doing the fundamental footwork, the extensive, long-term investigative work necessary to build these compelling and terrifying case histories for these realities. These include, most notably, Dr. Carla Turner, Dr. David Jacobs, and the true pioneer in the field, Bud Hopkins. And I'll certainly include Dr. John Mack in that group. Although I must insert a caveat here, while I hold Dr. John Mack, who was the head of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard, in extremely high regard and acknowledge his great initial work, I believe he ultimately drew the wrong conclusions about the ultimate nature of the phenomenon. But researchers like Bud Hopkins, Carla Turner, and David Jacobs and others established, in my opinion, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the abduction phenomenon is real, that it is physical, and that it is objectively happening. It is not merely a misinterpretation of a near-death experience. It's not a demonic possession. It is absolutely not an out-of-body experience. It's not sleep paralysis. It's not astral projection. It is, quite simply, the Greys. It is mostly the Greys who come and physically take you onto their vessel. You are physically gone. You are physically missing from your environment. Your spirit didn't go somewhere. Your imagination wasn't triggered. You are gone. And do you know why you're gone? You know why you're not laying on your couch or laying in your bed? Because you are literally on board their vessel. And without getting too deep into the clinical aspects of the abduction phenomenon, you are on their vessel because you are being involuntarily incorporated into their genetic breeding program. Breeding program? Yes, they are engaged in the systemic creation of hybrids, alien-human hybrids. I didn't know that. That is the primary, overarching purpose of the abduction program as far as the most competent research has been able to ascertain. They extract semen from males. They take eggs from females. They modify the eggs in vitro, adding some sort of highly exotic alien genetic component, and then they implant the resulting zygote into the womb. Notably, this happens even to women who have had hysterectomies. There's a process of extrauterine insertion and implantation that allows the woman to carry a fetus even without a functioning womb. The entire purpose of this is, again, as far as we can tell, to create that vital human connection to the mother. The ultimate end goal is to create human-alien hybrids that are, eventually, completely indistinguishable from us. Why? In the clear, chilling words of Dr. David Jacobs, the end goal is planetary acquisition through stealth. It is conquest by stealth. Is this where we're starting to see some of the sightings of reptilians or? No, this is different entirely. This is what David Jacobs accurately describes as the advanced alien-human hybrids or hybrids, and it is a systematic, generations-long program of hybridization. So, John Mack and David Jacobs, both of these meticulous abduction researchers, and remember, David Jacobs was a tenured history professor at Temple University. Both of them came up with definitive lists. And I truly wish I had known we were going to discuss abduction because I would have brought these lists with me. Both of them essentially said, if you are going to make the claim that alien abduction is simply psychological or that it is non-physical or some spiritual phenomenon, then you have to account for these facts. Exactly. You have to account for these specific points of physical evidence. They each had a different list of objective bullet points that demanded physical explanation. And these people never came back? They do come back, yes, but they are gone while they're gone. They are physically not there anymore. They just come back. And they're pregnant? Well, they're not necessarily visibly pregnant. Most women don't realize they're pregnant because they are typically re-abducted before they start to show, and the fetuses are extracted. These are then placed into a gestation tank to complete the rest of their maturation and development. Didn't you have somebody, sorry, I just have to interject while we're here because there are so many questions people are wondering, like last year at the conference, wasn't there somebody whose job it was to literally check multiple witnesses, and they would get the exact same story from multiple people who didn't know each other? That's exactly what competent abduction researchers do. Yeah, that's what those pioneer abduction researchers did. There aren't, as far as I know, and forgive me if I miss someone who qualifies, but I don't know of any truly competent, evidence-based abduction researchers operating actively anymore. The field has become too saturated and tainted with New Age philosophies and various kinds of nonsense. The people I referenced earlier were highly scientific, almost clinical in their approach, and crucially, they compiled physical evidence. Let me share this. I have a very close friend who I have suspected of being an abductee for many years. It was always just a hunch, a suspicion I carried about this good friend of mine. And this is the key point. There is physical, verifiable evidence related to the abduction phenomenon, unlike some other, more nebulous aspects of UFO research where it's notoriously difficult to obtain hard physical proof. That is not the case with abduction. Again, when you are being abducted, you are not there. You are not in your bed anymore. You are not in your house. You are gone for a measurable, extended period of time, and then you are brought back. Sometimes abductees, when they are brought back, are not even returned to their beds. They are left outside and have to break back into their own house. They throw a chair through the window or they have to call a locksmith to get back inside. Sometimes they are brought back without their clothes on, or perhaps with their clothes on backwards, or even wearing someone else's clothing. Furthermore, they come back in many, many cases with physical scars, distinctive scoop marks, linear cuts, or precise geometric configurations of scars that they absolutely did not have before they went to sleep. And apart from the scarring, you have the women returning with fetuses in their wombs that later disappear. This is a medical reality referred to as missing fetus syndrome, MFS. What this means is that there is a widely known medical phenomenon where women are confirmed pregnant, they have measurable fetuses in their wombs, and then the fetuses are abruptly gone. Missing fetus syndrome. Well, those of us who are well-versed in alien abduction research know it's not missing. It's simply taken. This phenomenon is incredibly common. In fact, I believe that virtually all female abductees are being used to incubate alien hybrids. This remains true even if, in their normal lives, they are clinically infertile or unable to get pregnant naturally. It simply doesn't matter to the process. So, you'll have a woman, in some cases a virgin, who suddenly realizes she is pregnant. This is profoundly confusing. She goes to a gynecologist. The gynecologist says, "You are pregnant." And she replies, "That is impossible. I'm like the Virgin Mary over here. That is impossible." And the gynecologist, of course, does not believe her. Yeah. She goes home and she is distraught. How can this possibly be? Did somebody slip me a roofie? What happened? And she knows she's pregnant now, she has a fetus, but before she starts to visibly show, usually around the 3-month period, the Greys abduct her again and they remove the fetus. She subsequently goes back into her gynecologist, and the baby is gone. The fetus is gone. The gynecologist will invariably say, you must have had a miscarriage." And she says, "Well, as far as I know, I didn't experience any signs of a miscarriage." But the gynecologist is going to assume, medically, that she had a miscarriage and simply didn't realize it. In some cases, the abductees are also telepathically interlaced with the phenomenon and the beings. And crucially, they have implants. There is alien technology implanted in their bodies that has been successfully extracted. especially by the late Dr. Roger Lear. So we found them? Oh, we have them. Yes, certainly. Steven Spielberg, for one, allegedly has a collection of verified alien implants. So, you can have a woman who is actively contemplating abortion when she realizes she's pregnant, and before she goes in for the procedure, the Greys come and get the fetus. She goes in for the abortion appointment, and there is nothing there. This is a very common scenario. So again, this is an evidence-based field. You have people with scars, with scoop marks. Going back to my friend who I've suspected for years was an abductee. He came into my office the other day, and he and I talked. He's very well versed on alien abduction research and terminology. He walks into my office and says, "Hey, I forgot to tell you. They came and got me." And I looked at him in shock. "What? Who came and got you?" He said, "They came and got me." And I said, "The Greys?" And he said, "Yeah, dude." And he pulled up his sleeve and showed me the scar. And it was a textbook, typical abduction scar. It was a delta-shaped grouping, 3 dots forming a triangle, and then 1 dot in the middle. A typical, confirmed abduction scar. He said, "Look, I had this wild experience at night." He knows about screen memories, which are false memories implanted to cover up the authentic memories of the experience. He said, "I had this wild experience which I think was a screen memory, and they got me and I woke up with this. And I was just frozen. It was like a punch in the face. Realizing, oh my God, it's true. It happened to him." So the stated purpose being that they are trying to infiltrate and take over the planet? Or are there other motives? Because you know the Christians are saying that they're Nephilim? What is Nephilim? The Nephilim theory posits that all aliens are Nephilim, which means they are the offspring of fallen angels and human women, and you are saying, no, this is a race of... Okay, well, if you're going to, and here we go, wading into hot water again. So, Christians approach this, they approach a lot of topics like this with containers, pre-manufactured intellectual containers. This is what is technically called presuppositionalism, theologically speaking. A presuppositionalist will approach a topic with the conclusion already firmly in hand. Yeah. And this is literally like a theological position. I'm a presuppositionalist, which means I've already determined through my reading of the Bible that the 6 days of creation are literal 6 days. That's an example. And then this kind of person will state, I am a presuppositionalist, which means that when I approach this topic, I don't care what the data is. I'm going to take that data, twist it, mangle it, compress it, and stick it into my Tupperware container labeled 6-day creation, or whatever it may be. That is a presuppositional theological position. I am not a presuppositionalist, so I don't have that container. But a vast number of Christians, they carry around these little metaphysical Tupperware containers with a label on them. And here's one. Fallen angels, Nephilim, demons. That's one container. It's a little figurative Tupperware container they carry around with them. So out goes the Christian into the world. Oh, I'm interested in the UFO thing. Okay, I hear about the testimonies in Congress. Alien abduction? Oh, that's easy. Right into this container. Massive bias. This one's labeled fallen angels. Nephilim, demons. Got it. Put the lid on that sucker and you're good to go. Right? Yep. That is what so many Christians do. I'm sorry, but that is their method. That's true. That's called presuppositionalism. You have a presumption that anything weird, unexplainable, or anomalous has got to be fallen angels, Nephilim, or demons. Same psychologically with the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is another way to phrase it, but I find it more illustrative to think of people carrying metaphysical Tupperware around in their pockets. Nice image. So, they pull that Tupperware out of their backpack and think, oh, that's unexplainable. Let me put that here. This will fit here. It really doesn't fit. It's like those wooden shape sorting games for kids where they have to put the right shape into the right corresponding hole. Yeah, the right mold, right? The right hole. And it's like taking a rectangle when you have a square, and you have a circle in the wood, and you take this rectangle, but everything must fit into your circle. So what do? You put the rectangle on the hole, grab a hammer, and you just pound it in there. You smash it in there. It doesn't matter if in the process you're destroying the facts. cut away data to make it fit. That's right. Or you cut away data. That's a much better way to say it. You shave off the corners of that rectangle to make it look like a circle so that it fits into your circular hole. That is simply not good research. That is not investigative prowess. That is pure bias. And I'm sorry, I am an investigative researcher. I do not operate from presuppositions. I am looking for the facts and I formulate my understanding of reality, such as it is, based on what I can determine to be either likely true or stone-cold fact. Aha! And I don't walk around with Tupperware. Now, as everyone knows, I am anchored in the gospel of Christ. My worldview, we've talked about that. I have a Christocentric perspective of the universe and so forth. But the problem is that so many Christians approach this topic, and they have already predetermined what the answer is, regardless of the facts presented. If you are going to do that, that's fine. But please don't call yourself a researcher. Don't call yourself an investigator if you're coming to the table with a preconceived notion and your Tupperware container that you're going to slam all this information into. I'm sorry. That is just not how the world works. And so the only way for Christians to try to make sense of this phenomenon biblically speaking is to slap one of these three labels on it. Fallen angel, Nephilim, demon. And if you say to a Christian, okay, that's nice, but these facts directly conflict with that theory. Some Christians who I have encountered will go, oh, you're right. Oh, you're right. I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board here. Most Christians, however, simply go, I don't care about the facts. It's just sci-fi. It's Project Blue Beam. That is the process of forcing that square, rectangular peg into a circular hole. Oh, it's all deception. It's just all deception, right? I've got to calm down. I'm going to get all worked up. Pause. See, but pause. Hold on. Let me get distracted. Here's my question. Everything you're saying is empirically true, and I understand that much more than most people. However, it's not necessarily in conflict with the Bible. It's in conflict with their interpretation or their Tupperware. Yes. So what, you know more about this than anyone I've ever talked to. So what does it mean? Were they here? Were the Greys around when Jesus was born? Or I am going to present you with one of the most problematic presuppositional positions that exists. Oh Jesus. The position is, the Bible tells us about everything. Interesting. Got it. Wrong. The fact is, the Bible tells us about some things. Any rational, intellectually honest person knows that to be true. Yes, we have the Son of God, who is, by the way, the Maker according to the Scriptures. Yes, this is He through whom and for whom all things were created and have their being. Yes. So, this is the Maker of the universe walking among us in the 1st century, and He is walking through Judea, teaching about the kingdom of heaven, often in the form of analogy or, rather, allegory, which are parables. Parables are a form of allegory. So, He is analogizing the kingdom of heaven in the form of parables, which is, again, allegory, and He is fundamentally teaching people about the kingdom. That's His main focus. And He is reprimanding the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, as He goes along. And He's healing the sick, demonstrating that He is exactly who He claims to be. This is the recorded work of Jesus of Nazareth. This is the Maker of the universe. He could have, at any moment, instructed the Jews who were under the crushing domination of the Romans. He could have said, you know what? Let me tell you something about this thing called electricity. Internal combustion. The germ theory of disease. Hey, physicians. Let me gather all the physicians together. I want you guys to do one thing before you deliver a baby. Wash your hands. Any one of these things would have instantly upgraded any of these scientific fields. Instantly upgraded them to such an extent that he could have taught the scientific thinkers among the Jews to develop weapons and tools to overthrow the Romans if he had wanted to. Yep. Not one single syllable about any of this. Right. Yep. He didn't tell us anything about any of that. He didn't say, hey, you see these stars out here? You see these planets and all this? Let me tell you what's out there. Let me draw you a schematic of where you are in the midst of all this. He knows He made it. Nothing about any of that. He talked to us like we were toddlers and instead tried to tell us about the kingdom and His Father. Right. That's what He did. So, If that is what the literal Son of God did in the flesh, why do we expect the Bible to tell us about any of these things? I don't understand. Somebody needs to inform me. Why would I expect the Bible when we had the Word of God not in print but in flesh, who could have easily told us about the internet or said, in the future people are going to have this thing called the internet. People are going to be flying, soaring around in those massive metal contraptions we call airplanes. Did he? No. Absolutely nothing of that nature was revealed to us. The fundamental truth is this: God is under no obligation to disclose every minute detail. That's undeniably true. He simply isn't. The Creator is not obliged to tell you anything at all. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, we are merely infants, spiritual toddlers, if you will. He will reveal only the essential information, the minimum necessary data required for you to actively seek communion with Him, and to structure your existence according to the divine precepts and the eternal principles of the kingdom of heaven. That was Jesus's entire mission and focus. Yes, precisely. It's all centered on cultivating belief in His Son, a fact that is, incidentally, the core commandment of the Father. If you ask, "What must I do?" Jesus gave the clearest answer. The Father commands you to believe in the Son. Therefore, Jesus wasn't preoccupied with enhancing the empirical or scientific understanding of the first-century Jews. This is not to imply that the pursuit of science is inherently ungodly or hostile to faith. Quite the opposite. I maintain that legitimate scientific endeavors, such as those masterfully undertaken by Isaac Newton, were fundamentally driven by a deep desire to understand and appreciate the mechanics of the Maker's creation. That was his core motivation. He documented this purpose extensively throughout his writings. His primary driver was an overwhelming, reverent awe of God's craftsmanship. He truly believed he had been uniquely gifted with that unparalleled mind specifically to probe and unravel those inherent mysteries of existence. And for the record, he penned, by some counts, 4 times more material on theology than he did on physics and mathematics. Some of that theology is profoundly brilliant. Granted, some of it is less conventional. Yes, but I study Newton. I deeply admire Newton. He is, frankly, one of my intellectual heroes. When people try to dismiss him by whispering, "Oh, he was a Freemason," or similar nonsense, you know what I say? Just hold on. Quiet your tongue. Hold up. You are talking about the man who single-handedly developed the foundational principles of calculus in significantly less time than it takes a modern college student just to pass the course. Discovered. He certainly earned a lot of antagonism in the laboratory of life. He discovered calculus and fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe. So circling back to the essential argument, the Holy Scriptures provide surprisingly few details about miscellaneous knowledge, about the physics of the stars, or the chemical composition of elements, but they offer exhaustive, crucial information about the Son of God, and precisely what is required of us to please the Father, to genuinely know the divine, to establish righteous governance on this earth, right? And ultimately to gain entrance into the kingdom of heaven. Exactly right. That is the defining purpose of the scriptural canon. Now, does it contain secondary information? Are there subtle clues, profound hints, esoteric messages hidden within? Certainly. Absolutely. There are aspects intentionally veiled. Prophecy, by its very nature, is esoteric and coded, as we have often discussed. And this brings me to a core tenet, which, incidentally, serves as the slogan for my membership community. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. God actively engages in the business of mystery and concealment. I apologize to those who prefer simple answers, but that is reality. I honestly feel like we constantly lose perspective on just how immense and incomprehensible God truly is. Yes. And we forget just how utterly, ridiculously insignificant we are. We are 6 feet of temporary organic matter. We are these tiny, insignificant specks. We're mere infants grasping in the dark. And yet, here we stand, somehow convinced that those 66 books of Scripture, compiled and penned largely by people living in the Iron Age, are somehow intended to serve as a comprehensive, final resource detailing absolutely everything that exists in the multiverse. Why would we possibly assume that? Which, just to clarify a vital distinction, stating this fact in no way diminishes your profound reverence. I know you absolutely cherish the scriptures. And not at all. No, I maintain an unwavering Christocentric perspective. I place Christ, the Logos, at the absolute center of all existence. This entire narrative, as I've repeatedly stressed on your program, is fundamentally not about humanity. It is exclusively about him. It is his story. We are, at best, minor, ancillary characters within that divine drama. This is why, let me be blunt, if you refuse to believe in him, if you fail to align yourself completely, if your primary allegiance does not rest solely with the King of Heaven, then you are simply irrelevant to the narrative. Goodbye. Because the story is not centered on you. It revolves around him and those who choose to stand with him. And it's his epic. You are utterly insignificant when measured against the Son of God. Infinitely, perpetually insignificant. The Father loves his Son more than he loves any one of us. That is an undisputed biblical fact. And while people often retort, well, but he sent his Son to die for us. Yes, that is true. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. But simultaneously, he has glorified that Son and placed him in ultimate authority over every created thing. And if you choose to reject that Son, the very Father who allowed his Son to endure death for your sake will also, without hesitation, condemn you to hell. So, the love he holds for his Son exceeds the love he holds for you. Your ultimate, defining allegiance must be given to the Son of God. And that is the critical factor. That's the only thing that truly matters, and that, fundamentally, is my testimony, my unwavering witness. So, why did I go down that path? Yes. So, viewed from a truly Christocentric perspective, it becomes completely immaterial how vast the cosmos is. It doesn't matter what else is out there. Who genuinely cares? That complexity is not our story. God remains under no obligation whatsoever to give me a complete cosmological map. My sole responsibility is to embrace and believe what he has chosen to reveal. And what has been revealed, the core, primary message, the eternal memo, is that Jesus is his Son. And the absolute, defining commandment of the Father is to believe in his Son. And the corresponding commandment of the Son, is to love one another. Oh dear. All those aggressive Christian commentators and trolls out there suddenly find themselves exposed. We're utterly doomed. Oops. So, the supreme commandment of God is to believe in his Son, and the supreme commandment of Jesus Christ is to love one another. And here is where we encounter complexity. The scripture does reveal a great many things that are hidden. So, the majority of those deeply concealed truths are not comprehended anyway, not by the broader Christian community, not by most pastors, not even by the professional theologians or biblical scholars. Most fail to grasp these concepts because there exists a profound, divine wisdom that inherently trumps mere academic scholarship. It is the type of perceptive insight that was granted to King Solomon. It is wisdom that can only be properly understood and communicated through complex symbolism and, yes, through astrology. And let me be perfectly clear. When I use the term astrology, I am absolutely not referring to pagan divination. I don't mean worshipping the stars, or deriving personality traits from zodiac signs. I am referring to the material we covered extensively at my conference, the eternal messages that are literally inscribed within the stars themselves. The book of nature. It is the celestial book, and the witness of the stars is, in fact, the testimony of the Son of God, charting his predetermined mission and his ultimate victory over the powers of darkness and chaos. That is the context I am referencing when I discuss biblical astrology, which is a divine witness of the Son of God. Right? Yep. So the point is, going back to the primary thesis we started with, God is under no obligation to reveal everything to you. To proceed under the massive presupposition that we, as human beings, possess comprehensive knowledge of everything that exists out there, simply because the Bible details X, Y, and Z is an intellectually erroneous and I would argue frankly absurd position. It is simply not factual. It is demonstrably untrue. There is not a single verse in the entire Bible, not one, that gives explicit details about the existence of robots. Now, you can take some vague, random passage and twist it through layers of eisegesis, but there's no direct account of robotics. Do we currently live in a world where robots are real? Yes, we do. And so, therefore, the reality demands that we must study extra-biblically. Well, wait, do we live in a world with sophisticated robots? Yeah. Is there a specific verse that explicitly tells you about a classic gray alien biological entity? No. Yet. Do we live in a world where evidence of gray aliens exists? The answer is yes. The principle is exceedingly simple, but people desperately need to approach these topics rationally and soberly. And the endemic problem is that we approach these highly sensitive topics emotionally. Yeah. With our little theological Tupperware containers. Yeah. And then we become deeply offended if someone, like Timothy Alberino, who is apparently the master, the grand perpetrator of SCOPs, strategic deception operations, over here dares to speak plainly. Apparently, that should genuinely be your Twitter bio. It should be, I'm going to commission a t-shirt, that I'm deceiving the flock simply because I have acknowledged the documented reality of the crash retrieval program and the associated biological entities. But by that same standard, I also acknowledge the reality of robots, and I also acknowledge the existence of the internet, and I also acknowledge the reality of jet airplanes, internal combustion engines, lasers, whatever. Because these technologies and phenomena are empirically real. MHM. The Bible gave me no direct instruction concerning any of these realities. And often, critics retort, well, those specific things don't really bear upon salvific issues. Oh yes, they absolutely do. Hello. Transhumanism. How precisely am I supposed to navigate the complex moral maze of transhumanism? The Bible did not explicitly detail that we would develop the technology capable of radically extending human lifespans. Now, there are some ambiguous, veiled references that you could extrapolate that's being predicted, but not directly. So, how do I navigate this? The same way I navigate the alien question. I firmly anchor myself in the gospel of Christ. Okay. I place Christ at the epicenter of all things. He is the undisputed King of the universe. All things were created through him and for him, and he existed before all things, and in him all things consist. That is my eschatology. Those are my fundamental, unshakable tenets. That's my worldview. I genuinely do not care if sophisticated robots exist. I do not care if gray aliens exist. What possible difference does it make to my core faith? And then, predictably, people trot out the old philosophical chestnut. Well, but if there are aliens, then what about, didn't Jesus die for us on the cross? And did he die for the aliens? Does that mean he died for aliens? I'm like, I don't care. He didn't die for angels. You think this is some novel, modern philosophical conundrum? It's not. It's the identical theological problem we already solved regarding the angels. Okay, same answer. It's clear. He did not redeem the angels. And what that means is he didn't establish a path for their rectification and restoration into the family of God. Reconciliation for the angels because they had more knowledge than we do. He provided the way for us. Now, what does that mean for a gray alien or an insectoid species or something else? I don't know. And I frankly don't care. I don't care. I don't have a Tupperware. I don't have to violently smash things in there. Because Christ is at the center of my universe, not man. That's the problem. See, we've talked about this on your show. Yeah. Most people are crippled, utterly hamstrung, by an anthropocentric perspective of the universe. It's all about us. We believe we stand at the center of this thing. No, we absolutely do not. Christ is the center. And that single, small intellectual maneuver there, where you remove us, you make us merely a spoke on the wheel, and you put Christ securely as the hub, that shift alone really expands your cognitive paradigm sufficiently to where all of these things can be accommodated without generating a theological crisis. So, just because it is ultimately unimportant to your salvation, does that mean you personally lack a working hypothesis? Oh no, I have hypotheses. I have thoughts. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is in the absence of information as it pertains specifically as it pertains to gray biological entities, the typical Christian immediately approaches the subject gripping their theological Tupperware container. MHM. And they operate under the rigid presupposition that the Bible does tell us what this is. See, I have a container here, They insist. And it is labeled fallen angel or Nephilim or demon. It has to be one of those things. So they physically attempt to squish the complex reality in there. Yeah. And I'm saying maybe, and maybe not. Maybe there are only certain aspects of this phenomenon that can be partially answered by some of that. Let's analyze the first one, the so-called fallen angel, which are more accurately described as apostate sons of God. Fallen is not a physical description of anything. In fact, fallen angel is not even a direct biblical term. It's a biblical idea, but it's not a biblical term. The fallen aspect here is called insubordination, defection from the kingdom, or rebels. Right? They do not necessarily look distinct. They are not a different species. They are the siblings of the good guys. They just happen to be on the wrong side of this conflict. They're in opposition to the King of Heaven rather than loyal. They're not loyal to him. They're disloyal. Disloyal sons of God. Right? Okay. So, you have these entities that are very, very old. They pre-exist us. We've talked about this on your show. I know I'm being repetitive here. These are things we've discussed. These beings pre-exist us. Full stop. That's a foundational biblical fact. The sons of God pre-exist us, biblically speaking. So, and I'm going to also add to this that their civilization pre-exists ours. Now, most Christians aren't accustomed to thinking about the kingdom of heaven as a complex, sophisticated civilization, but that's what it is. They possess and utilize technology. They manufacture and wield technology. That's apparent. I mean, it's apparent in the biblical narrative. Now, people say, no, they just pretend to. Or, it's just spiritual. Or, here's an oxymoron. Supernatural technology. It's an oxymoron. So, and the reason why that's an oxymoron is because if something is truly supernatural, it exists above nature, outside the laws of physics. Technology is the practice of observing and availing ourselves of the known laws and mechanisms of nature. And we take the things we know about nature and we make technology. If something is supernatural, it is inherently unknown and unknowable, right? And if you label this thing supernatural, for example, let's look back to the medieval world. They didn't know where diseases came from. So the medieval person would attribute diseases to foul air, literally foul air, or demonic spirits, which I think there's some truth to that. But of course, we know that the common cold isn't a demon, right? We know what happens. How do I get the cold? It's not demon possession. I come into contact with someone who's got that virus and I get infected and I get the cold, right? So that's the germ theory of disease. So but in the Middle Ages, in that world, from their limited understanding, they thought that diseases came from the things previously mentioned, supernatural causes, foul air. They had a host of ridiculous ideas until somebody invented a pivotal technological implement called the microscope. And then we took the microscope, which gave us a new perspective. We looked through that microscope and we saw a microscopic world of living things that we didn't see before. We're like, oh, okay. There are these minuscule things that are alive and that get into our bodies. Some of these things are what we call bacteria and others are like these little machines called viruses. And then we formulated the germ theory of diseases. So, the crucial point is, a phenomenon is only supernatural when it remains utterly incomprehensible. Right? But once you've gained insight, in the case of germ theory through technology, it's no longer super and now it's just natural. A natural. Right? So what is truly supernatural? Okay. God is supernatural. God is supernatural. That's the one singular supernatural thing in existence. Everything else was a part of the system we call the universe and abides by the laws of physics and is a part of the natural world. And I always quote Arthur C. Clarke, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I always like to substitute that word, is indistinguishable from supernaturalism. Okay, so that's why so many people get confused with the UFO stuff. Man, I've gone far afield here. But that's why so many people get confused with the UFO stuff because they say, wait a minute, these things disappear. They do this. They do that. There are these capabilities, alien abductions, people. It's like a near-death experience. All of this is supernatural, spiritual. And it's like, no, it's technological, clearly. Just really, really, really mind-blowingly advanced technology. Some of which we've reverse-engineered. So this is a different level of comprehension here. I don't have a bucket. I don't have a supernatural Tupperware in my pocket. MHM. So that's why I like to say that the word supernatural has no explanatory power. I don't mind if people use it. I understand what people mean. I get it. I comprehend what people mean by it. But if you think about it, the word supernatural has no explanatory power. It doesn't explain anything. Doesn't describe anything. It's amorphous. It's nebulous. So, we're looking at going full circle here back to the UFO, the Crash Retrieval Legacy Program. We are looking at a technological phenomenon with biological creatures. There's a lot of debate on where they come from, what they are. Are they time travelers? Are they interdimensional beings? Are they cryptoterrestrial beings? Are they manifestations of the universal consciousness? These are all the new fashionable ideas. Some of them aren't new, but a lot of these are newfangled ideas. Are they artificial intelligence? It's like, I don't know, but they crash and die. And they have bodies. And they have bodies. And if you ever get a chance to put a bullet in one, it will drop dead. So, these are things that are known. These are the knowns that I was talking about earlier from the old school ufology. We know these things. Yeah. We don't have to rediscover these things. We know them to be true. And you can't. By the way, let me just throw this out there. I want to increase the amount of mean comments you guys are going to get on this video. You always do this, bro. Let's do this. Alright. So everybody says, oh, okay. It's interdimensional. That's the default. Even Representative Luna, Napoleon Luna, it's interdimensional. Obviously, nobody, by the way, at the highest levels, nobody that I interact with is committing to any interdimensional hypothesis. Can you explain the boundary lines of interdimensional? It's not that they can't go between dimensions, but they're explicitly interdimensional is a little bit like the word supernatural in that it is nearly meaningless, because first you have to determine what you mean by interdimensional before you can try and formulate some kind of theory of UFOs. Interdimensional means nothing on its own. You have to reference a scientific theory here. Are we talking multiverse? Are we talking, the astral plane? Are we talking, oh shoot, I just drew a blank, the brand of physics that Michio Kaku is a proponent of superstring theory? Are we talking about superstring theory here? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the extra-spatial theory of the universe? What are we talking about here? Because all of these are very different theories, distinct theories in physics. So when you say interdimensional, which one of these theories are you invoking? I already know the answer. Most people aren't invoking a theory. They're invoking a movie. What movie? They're invoking the Marvel Universe. They're invoking, not to much less extent, but you could invoke the Chronicles of Narnia, the wardrobe that takes you to Narnia. They're invoking pop culture, right? That's the problem. See, because most people don't understand. I didn't until I educated myself that interdimensional is nothing until you've given it a destination. Where did you start? Where did you go? I would assume they just mean consciousness. It's like it's in that dimension. Well, here's what people are invoking. Doctor Strange doing this with his ring, opening the portal, and then going into the multiverse. Or are you good or you bored? I'm good. My brain's just like trying to hang on. You guys got to fight. No. I talked for 7 hours yesterday. This is great. So I'll wrap this up. So when you talk about interdimensional hypothesis, you have to determine of aliens, you have to determine which hypothesis are you referring to, or are you just like doing the Marvel Universe? Yeah. Okay. 'Cause that's fantasy. Or are you referencing some scientific theory, some theory in physics, astrophysics, or whatever? What's your theory? Because before you use that word, you got to have a destination. If this is an interdimensional entity, but if that is the case, what is its actual destination? Are we just talking about a plot device from a Netflix series like Stranger Things? Is this thing headed toward Planet X? Or whatever they decided to call that frightening void in the show. The abyss, the upside down. The Upside Down. Well, we were ultimately informed that the Upside Down was merely a wormhole. Fine, but frankly, it's a rather lazy piece of writing. Have you seen Season 5? So, let's pivot away from that narrative confusion and talk about conformity gate. Oh God, Look, I just want to maximize your views. This is the madness of the digital age. If we utter a phrase like conformity gate, your metrics will spike. People will click, thinking, Elino knows the deep secrets of conformity gate. So, regardless, what is your genuine hypothesis? If we grant the premise that we are dealing with something interdimensional, we have to consider a crucial distinction. Is this a fundamentally physical creature that has developed the technological capacity to exploit additional dimensions? Or is the very essence of this creature non-physical, completely outside the jurisdiction of the three spatial dimensions and the fourth dimension of time that govern our reality? If you cannot specify what you mean by interdimensional, then you have, quite literally, offered zero meaningful information. But it makes you sound so intelligent. Precisely. You utter the phrase, you sound like you possess the answer, yet you hold nothing concrete. Now, let me be clear, I am not fundamentally opposed to the interdimensional hypothesis, provided it comes with clear, rigorous specifications. Let's refine this idea. I adhere to the hyperspatial theory of the universe. I originally called it extraspatial, but hyperspatial is the more precise term. What does the hyperspatial theory propose? It's a concept that aligns neatly with the framework of string theory. While I admit I am uncertain if string theory reflects ultimate reality, I find it compellingly elegant and internally resonant. We will never truly know if it's real. We cannot prove it, perhaps, but the hyperspatial model posits that our universe possesses more physical dimensions, and keep that word, physical, in mind, than the three large spatial dimensions and the single dimension of time. String theorists typically suggest there are at least 10. Superstring theory ups the ante to 11. But what do they mean by these extra dimensions? They are not referring to some fictional destination like Planet X or the Upside Down. They are not talking about Narnia. They are certainly not talking about the multiverse. They mean that in addition to the three large, accessible dimensions we interact with, length, height, width, and then the fourth of time, those are the macro-world dimensions. The theory then posits 6 additional physical dimensions that are infinitesimally tiny, curled up at the Planck level, subatomic in scale. We cannot directly perceive or interact with them, but they exist. These are subatomic dimensions. So, when researchers at CERN declare they are searching for other dimensions, they are not looking for some fantastical parallel multiverse. They are hunting for these subatomic compactified dimensions. And if they report something coming through, they are talking about certain particles, not little green men. Now, could a technologically advanced civilization utilize these dimensions? Perhaps for something like instantaneous transportation? Absolutely. That's essentially the underlying concept behind Star Wars, not Star Trek. Star Wars utilizes the hyperspace highway. When a starship jumps to light speed, kicking in the hyperdrive, this concept is actually quite scientific according to superstring mechanics. They navigate a hyperspatial shortcut, a folded spacetime route between 2 distinct physical locations in the universe. Crucially, they begin in a physical part of our universe and they end in a physical part of our universe. Could we categorize that action as interdimensional? Yes, because you are actively utilizing an extraspatial dimension. That is, by definition, an interdimensional maneuver, right? Is this the idea of the Einstein-Rosen bridge? Yes, this is the core idea of an Einstein-Rosen bridge, creating a shortcut through 2 points in space. You know the classic analogy. Take a piece of paper, fold it, and poke a hole. That act of poking the hole is interdimensional. Why is it interdimensional? Because it travels through. It is utilizing a dimension beyond the 3D surface of the paper. You have momentarily opened a dimensional portal. But note, it is not transporting you to an entirely separate universe. It might take you from Earth to Mars. You remain firmly inside the bounds of our own cosmos. Therefore, when you invoke an interdimensional being, such a thing cannot genuinely exist unless you are claiming that there is a completely separate universe, one operating under fundamentally different laws of physics, and that these beings are originating from that foreign universe. Well, that concept is called the multiverse, which I reject entirely and out of hand. Do you know why the multiverse theory was invented? It's because astrophysicists, mathematicians, and scientists generally realized that the universe had a definitive beginning. Bingo! And they realized, oops, there must be a creator. How do we elegantly circumvent this uncomfortable idea of a creator? Simple. Universes are perpetually spawning everywhere all the time. But it gets worse for the atheist cosmologists. Not only did they realize the universe had a beginning, but they realized our specific universe is exquisitely fine-tuned for life to exist, right here on Earth. There is a precise fine-tuning of cosmological constants so improbable that nothing we can engineer or create approaches its level of finely calibrated complexity. Oops, that screams intelligent design. So what are the atheistic physicists doing? What is their work around? How do they circumvent this undeniable evidence? They invent a new theory. They declare, I've got it. The universe is spontaneously popping into existence every second with wildly different physical attributes. Ours just happens, purely by chance, to be the one that works, amidst a nearly infinite number of failures. An infinite array. We merely happen to be the lucky residents in the one universe where the machinery functions this way, because it satisfies the statistical improbability. If you have an infinite number of universes, precisely, we fix the problem statistically. It's a blatant circumvention of the plain, observable fact that the universe had a beginning and was created by a specific entity. Do Christians who carelessly invoke the interdimensional thing understand this? Hello, the multiverse hypothesis is an intellectual escape route from creation, from a creator, and from intelligent design. So, people often protest, but I'm not talking about the multiverse. Yes, you are. You absolutely are. We only possess knowledge of one universe. All legitimate mainstream scientific theories, such as superstring theory, and I could bore you with the numerous variations, place the extra dimension squarely inside our universe. Now, some practitioners try to extrapolate these ideas into multiverse concepts, but even superstring theory itself remains highly theoretical. It is entirely within the realm of conjecture and hypotheses. Most of these hypotheses posit additional dimensions within our universe. Therefore, the beings, if such beings exist, who are exploiting these extra dimensions are not, by their nature, interdimensional. They are creatures of our universe, but they have learned to manipulate physics and geometry in ways we have not yet mastered. Yes, they are performing feats of advanced technology. Their nature is not interdimensional. Their technology is. That is the core confusion. Now, if the multiverse does exist, and you have a creature that emerges from one of these bubbles, one of these other universes with differing physical laws, and it pops over into our universe, that asterisk is an interdimensional being. And that being is inherently interdimensional. But here is the question, and I will conclude this point with it, as this is complex and exhausting. If such a being materialized in our universe, say a creature coming from planet Zeta, residing in its own multiverse bubble, meaning its physical properties are radically different from ours, its body structure, its environment, its chemistry, everything is distinct. If it enters our world, materializing according to the laws of our world, what must happen when it comes through that interdimensional gate? Interdimensional beings, by their very nature, would crash. Because the operating system doesn't work with our laws of physics. They crash. Exactly. We recover their technology. How in the world can we begin to make sense of it? We cannot. I mean, how the heck is that different from you and me discovering a book written entirely in Braille, having zero prior knowledge of Braille? It's just a pattern of tiny raised dots. How can we possibly derive meaning from that? We cannot interact with it whatsoever, right? We cannot make sense of it. Therefore, an interdimensional craft entering our environment and crashing, if we recover it, how do we even begin the process of reverse engineering technology that doesn't even operate on the same fundamental physical constants? Clearly, that is not what is happening. What we are recovering are craft manufactured within our own universe, bound by our shared laws of physics, but utilizing mechanisms of which we are currently unaware. We can, therefore, successfully reverse engineer them because we can grasp the rudimentary underlying principles. That is the realistic scenario. And the beings who are recovered, who crash and perish, are not interdimensional by nature. They are physical just like us. They possess organs. They have some form of blood, even if its composition differs from ours. They possess a physical structure, a body frame similar to ours. They have brains. That is the reality. That is just me dismantling the interdimensional hypothesis a bit. Now, again, let me state clearly for the record, I believe in the hyperspatial theory of the universe. I believe there are more physical dimensions than the three we are directly able to perceive. I also believe that angels can perceive and access the totality of creation, and that humanity, Adam, could do so at one time in the beginning. But we currently suffer from a defect which the Apostle Paul described, using an analogy which I paraphrase as cataracts. He speaks of seeing as if through a mirror dimly, or through a glass dimly. That clouded vision is like cataracts. So, because we have this obstructing film over our perception. But Adam, I would suggest, did not. So we must be cautious. We need to overhaul our intellectual models. We must stop grasping for simplistic answers. Stop carrying around your little Tupperware container and trying to jam every complex phenomenon into it, and then accusing anyone who doesn't conform to your model of shilling for the devil. That accusation is perhaps my least favorite thing people throw out there. Do you believe we will ever regain the state Adam enjoyed? Can there be a reversal? That is called the resurrection. We get reset back to Adam's original blueprint. Understood. We return into the kingdom of the sons of God, just as Adam was the son of God. We are punching our ticket back into that original kingdom. It is called the resurrection. You are resurrected to eternal life, and that happens. If you think deeply enough about that concept, I just opened up a massive, I was just about to say, a theological can of worms. We have to set a pin in that, but we definitely need to bring that back for a full discussion. I am not trying to attack anyone here. I am trying to compel people, specifically concerning the interdimensional claim, to define your terms before you stride around pretending you have all the answers and accusing those who disagree with you of being liars or deluded. Define your terms precisely. I am completely fine with an interdimensional hypothesis, provided it is properly defined within the laws of physics. Now, if you want to believe in the multiverse, go right ahead. But I do not believe the multiverse is a biblical concept. That is your prerogative, but last question, because you have now introduced the concept of dimensions, the spiritual reality where angels, demons, and other beings are said to exist. Is that one of those dimensions you are referencing? No. I believe that entire reality is contained within our universe. We just lack the ability to see it. Yes, it is fundamentally a problem of perception. I believe that we, specifically those in the West, have a highly westernized, truncated comprehension of what spirit actually means. That conception, in my mind, does not conform to reality because right here, I have a spirit. You have a spirit. We are spirit, but we are also flesh. And I am not a Gnostic. Gnostics believed that the spirit was inherently good and the flesh was inherently bad. That is a very reductive definition of Gnosticism, but the core premise holds. Gnostics believed the spiritual world was the perfect world and the physical world was a flawed, imperfect prison. That is definitively not a biblical concept. So, the spirit and the flesh, as they pertain to us, are intricately connected. They are inseparable. People often claim, we will have spirit bodies in the afterlife. No, we will not. We will have these bodies resurrected. That is what we are promised. How do I know that? Jesus of Nazareth. That is the perfect model. He was resurrected with his body, even bearing the marks of the crucifixion. And as he is, so shall we be at the resurrection. The point is, we are composites of spirit and flesh. We were designed to be this way, and this is how we will always exist, just without all the degeneration and biological mutation we have accumulated over countless generations. We possess a cosmological concept, and it is possible the ancient Hebrews shared this concept, but I don't think it conforms to reality. We have created in our minds a cosmology where there is a completely distinct spiritual world. But someone needs to demonstrate to me where that spiritual world exists. Show me how, if there is a spiritual world, people operate in that world differently than they do in this one. What is the answer? I don't know. Are there trees? Are there sunsets? Are there clouds? Most Christians would imagine streets and so forth because the Bible mentions streets of gold. Are there buildings? What exactly are we talking about here? What is this spiritual realm that people invoke? Is it just a place where everyone is like a gust of wind? What is it? Nobody dares define it because, when you attempt to, it immediately becomes irrational. Well, I have always posited this. It is tied to different things that you can see. It is different layers of consciousness. When Paul says, I was taken up into the third heaven, he saw things. But they were not necessarily physically different from the things we see here. Are people eating in the spiritual realm? Are they drinking? Yes. Are they making music? Yes. Then what makes it fundamentally different from ours? Well, the same thing that makes the level of consciousness. If you achieve a certain level, you can. So perhaps it is merely a transcendent version of this current reality? Potentially. Yeah. Or maybe it is a stacked reality, where everything is overlaid. Or something along those lines. Yes. Which is a completely different view than what most people hold. My point is that we are definitely going to be eating and drinking in the kingdom of heaven. Absolutely. So it is not all that different then. But is your theory that the grays will be there or no? Well, that depends on what you mean. See, what I am trying to say is that there is no separate spiritual realm. There is only the kingdom of heaven, and the kingdom of heaven is a place, and I believe it has distinct locality. And we are already spiritual beings. I think we operate under a misconception that acts almost like a multiverse. It is like there is one multiverse bubble that Christians subscribe to. It is called the spiritual world or the spiritual realm. That is like one of those secondary bubbles. I don't think so. I think everything exists inside of this universe, including the spiritual, including the kingdom of heaven. Realm. I think the kingdom of heaven is right at the center of it. Near you? I do not think Earth is the center of the universe. I literally think the kingdom of heaven, the place where God, or let's be more specific, where the Son of God reigns, is the absolute center of the universe. So, if he is reigning somewhere else, that is the center. If he is reigning here, then this is the center of the universe. Do you have any specific theories on its location? At the center of the universe. I mean, literally, I think it would be at the very center of our universe, wherever that point may be, because all things, I've invoked this before, but this is a good way to conclude what is my most fundamental Christology. My most fundamental theology? It is Colossians 1 verses 15 to 17, speaking of Jesus, where it states, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Yes, that is, in my estimation, the most elegant verses in the Bible describing the identity of the Son of God. That is my favorite passage because I get chills every time I recite it. Think about the profundity packed into those couple of verses. It is packed. That is a Christocentric perspective of the entire cosmos. Therefore, wherever the Son of God resides, that is the center of the universe. And I believe there is a place right now. It is a physical place. It is a place where people eat and drink. It is a place where crops are sown and harvested. It is a place with physical buildings and perhaps megalithic structures. And it is a place where a functioning kingdom exists. That kingdom possesses an army. The king of that kingdom is called the Lord of Armies. It is a place. It has a specific locality. The entire universe was created for that king. This entire cosmos is his realm. There is no separate dimension, no spiritual bubble realm where these things reside. No, it is this universe. This is where the action is. The king is here, and this is where all events happen and take place. So, it is a different perspective, one that many Christians are unfamiliar with, perhaps uncomfortable with. But know this, there is absolutely nothing unbiblical about it. That is the key difference in my mind. Is the kingdom of heaven transcendent to what we experience here? Yes, it is transcendent. But is it located within the same universe? I would emphatically say yes. Indications are yes. Transcendent, yes, yet intrinsically connected. Never truly separate from the reality we perceive. Yes, exactly. The scripture teaches us this pattern. Remember how the children of Israel were sustained in the desolate wilderness. They ate the grain of heaven, the very sustenance of the angels, as the psalmist describes it. What was it? Manna. What was manna fundamentally? Grain. Where did its origin lie? Heaven itself. The question remains, is that purely metaphorical? Or should we interpret that power literally? I need to step away and consume copious amounts of complex carbohydrates right now, James. I feel mentally inadequate. You absolutely need to ingest some of that metaphorical grain of heaven. Immediately, my friend. I feel obligated to go immerse myself in a stack of old books, because this is the very concept. The Lemba's bread. Isn't it? The food of the elves chronicled in The Lord of the Rings. That incredible waybread that Galadriel presents to the hobbits before their perilous journey. Right? Is it known as litmus bread or something similar? Lembas. Let's verify just how precise my retention of Middle-earth lore actually is. All those hours spent studying the appendices in high school have to yield some value eventually. Lembas. Ha! Lembas. I nailed it. Incredible. You see, just one small wafer could sustain a weary traveler for an entire day of hard journeying. Yes, and that is manna explicitly rendered into fantasy form. That's Tolkien's intentional parallel. Yes. And who, then, are the figures who embody the angelic realm within the world of the Lord of the Rings? They are the elves. Oh, I see it now. And what is the precise relationship of the elves to the human race, the men of Middle-earth? They are their elder siblings. Oh dear God in heaven, how did I manage to miss that staggering parallel for so long? Are the beings who Tolkien referred to as the Eldar. Seriously, how did I fail to connect those dots? You see, and let me state this clearly and definitively, J.R.R. Tolkien and his friend C.S. Lewis were not closet members of some shadowy, occultic secret society trying to hide messages in code. They were devout and committed believers in Christ. C.S. Lewis famously constructed the Chronicles of Narnia as an overt allegory, a direct retelling of the gospel message. Tolkien, however, openly disliked allegories. He absolutely despised them. So, he wrote The Lord of the Rings, and what he was doing was depicting fundamental spiritual reality, the deep truths he perceived, but casting them within a deeply detailed, fantastical secondary world. He believed the fantasy framework allowed the truth to shine more brightly, unburdened by didacticism. Right? Two fundamentally different thinkers, both of whom believed in the core tenets of Christianity unequivocally, and both of whom chose to write about the kingdom of heaven, but in two radically distinct narrative styles. Everybody easily grasps Lewis's method, but almost no one truly understands Tolkien's profound subversion of the genre. I am exceptionally glad you brought that up, because you were quite disheartened after the episodes we did discussing the accusations leveled by Gary Wayne. Yeah. One of the men we discussed was brilliant, but do you want to know what our single most criticized, most hated piece of content is? It's probably that one. People were furiously emailing us, saying, "Don't you dare take C.S. Lewis away from me." My response was immediate. Why on earth would I take him away from you? He articulated the gospel of Christ with precision, power, and extraordinary intellectual boldness. I am thrilled you clarified that position. Absolutely. I don't care if his uncle was a Freemason or what esoteric connections might exist in his history. Who cares? I certainly don't have the time or energy to deeply research every ancillary connection. The central point is this: you must assess and judge a person solely by the content of what they say and the actions they take, not by tenuous, extraneous connections they may have, or by people they once took a photograph with, or even by friends who happen to be Freemasons. I count Randall Carlson as a friend. He is a 32nd degree Freemason. Does that fact automatically make me a Freemason? Does that instantly invalidate every single statement I have offered here today? Does that render all my theological arguments null and void? Come on, let's apply some critical thinking. Let's not be intellectually lazy. But that entire controversy serves as a perfect illustration of just how brilliant and clever the Inklings, that famous literary group, were in their creative output. One writer, Lewis, crafted the pure allegory, which is an undeniably clear narrative representation of the gospel. The other, Tolkien, forged an entirely different depiction of the kingdom of heaven, one that was not merely allegory, but a deeply constructed, fantastical framework designed to reflect the spiritual reality as that man genuinely perceived it. We need to make this happen. We have to coordinate your schedule for an upcoming event. Where? We need to lock in a new slot for you on the event calendar. When is your next major conference? Are you planning one for this year? Oh, I have numerous possibilities and ideas that I'm currently exploring. Let's organize a massive gathering in Nashville. I already hosted one there years ago. 2026. Then. I'm always open to brainstorming any worthwhile concept. I am definitely pretty certain going to host an event in Bozeman, Montana. I'm not sure yet if it will take the form of a traditional conference. Okay. It might be something more intimate like a specialized dinner gathering. Yeah, where I give a focused talk, and then afterwards we all gather around a blazing fire, smoke high-quality cigars, maybe toss a few horseshoes and just have some genuine conversation. Something much more relaxed and communal. That, without exaggeration, was an absolutely great group of people when we did that previously. Yeah, because it was so much fun, wasn't it? You attended the conference I hosted in Bozeman, and it was a blast. But afterwards, maybe I shouldn't mention this, but I will, after the formal conference proceedings ended, late in the evening, all of us, all my special guests, including you guys, Congressman Burles, Mike Cernovich, and all the others, would congregate at the Airbnb rental. We'd sit around the fire pit and smoke cigars. Those were always, without fail, the best times. And I realized, I know everybody wants that experience. Forget the lectures. Everybody wants that camaraderie. So, I started thinking, how can I design an event where everyone actually gets to participate in that kind of atmosphere? It would likely be much more cost-effective too. Yes, and crucially, it involves far less logistical work. Yeah. And I know every single person listening to this right now, or at least a significant portion, is thinking, yes, that's precisely the experience I crave. I understand that desire. So I'm contemplating how to scale that feeling up, how to give everyone that specific experience. Of course, you can't manage 500 people doing that, but if you curate a small, intimate group, then you can authentically reproduce that communal experience. You have to vet them carefully, right? And that, in itself, is immensely rewarding. How much do I need to pay you to accompany you on your planned trip to Peru? What is the cost for me to join your expedition? I should be paying you to come along. That trip would be so incredibly fun. Anyone? Yes, I'm going. Do you want to join? Yeah. I'll let you know the exact dates when I finalize them. Do you want to go? That honestly sounds like a tremendous adventure. Let's make it happen. It sounds wonderful right up until the point you contract malaria. Just kidding. Oh, although, in fairness, you probably won't contract malaria. I will say, after the last episode where you detailed that fish that swims up, the vampire catfish, the infamous kangaroo, I am never, ever entering those Amazonian rivers. Period. I'm not nearly as concerned about the kangaroo, the tiny vampire catfish, as I am about the genuinely terrifying electric eels. But, okay. Guys, let's be honest, this expedition is going to be genuinely dangerous. And everyone, the last time I was on your show and I described the size of those electric eels, nobody in the audience believed me that they were that massive. I was stunned. Are you serious? Have you actually conducted any research into the colossal size these things attain in the Amazon basin? My stories were entirely accurate. True stories. Have I researched how big they get? Yes, because I was there. I did a little bit of research. I actually tried to hack one's head open with a machete once, which ranks as one of the single most monumentally idiotic things I've ever attempted in my life. So yes, I've done some research. Anyways, we should probably wrap up. We could legitimately ramble on like this all evening, guys. So, go find some sustenance, I suppose, and take some time to process everything you've heard. Perhaps rethink your entire life philosophy. That's pretty much exactly what we're about to go do now. So, enjoy Jesus, everyone. Thank you, Tim. You are the man. Thank you, guys. Always a genuine pleasure. We'll catch you all again next week.